bankers to their responsibilities. You made them pay their taxes, and that you sent them for their taxes. Big bang blew the walls down, the bankers got away. They filled their snouts till we bailed them out, now everyone must pay. Sod all you want, sod all you want, sod all you want, sod all you want. The left is dead, the media said, that's a goddamn lie. That which they could never kill went on to occupy. In the camps the watchword is accountability. In Wall Street and in London we demand transparency. Sod all you want, sod all you want, sod all you want, sod all you want. We have the best democracy that big money can buy. The markets call the tune and soon our leaders all comply. Come on, you greedy bankers, you pessimists as well. We're here today to chase you away and build a better world. Sod all you want, sod all you want, sod all you want, sod all you want. Through this world you travel, you meet some funny men. Some rob you with a 6-gun and some with a fountain pen. Through this life you ramble, through this life you roll. You'll never see an outlaw take family from their home. Sod all you want, sod all you want, sod all you want, sod all you want.
That they opened the pulpit up to Genocide Joe. Y'all can get mad, I don't care. And people, as he began to give his campaign speech, some protesters stood up and said, "Stop the blood in Palestine." Yeah, yeah. They said, if you're outraged by the blood of Selma and you're outraged by the blood that was spilled in this very church, then how about calling for a ceasefire in Palestine, since you've given them the weapons, you've given them the support, you've given them the money? Joe, why don't you do something about it? They marched and stood up and got kicked out of the church, and people said, we're outraged. You know, I was outraged too. Yes, sir. How dare you use this sacred space? How dare you use this beloved pulpit? How dare you use this sacred tradition? How dare you use the words of Jesus, who overturned the tables in the temple, who was committed to overturning a Roman government, who was committed to speaking out against injustice? How dare you use this space as a shield for imperial war? How dare you use this space as a shield for violence? How dare you use this space as a shield for genocide?
That's right, folks. It is Friday. Friday, January 19th, 2024. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This is the Marxist Archaeologist coming at you live from Ontario, Canada. With me, as always, is my comrade and your Frenchie, the Bunny. And that was Mark Lamont Hill preaching in the same church that genocide enabler Joe Biden was speaking at just last week when he was interrupted by protesters. And he's right. How dare they? Absolutely, how dare they? Another week of death, murder. I don't know. It's just indescribable crimes. There's nothing that can be said at this point that's going to sway anybody. Anyway, I hope everyone had a good week. My week wasn't too bad. It was just slow. I don't know. I don't know how much I love working from home yet. It's kind of annoying. But you know what? At least I'm getting paid. And I am somewhere warm and safe, and I can't say the same about thousands of people in my city right now. On the program today, it is, I believe it's this weekend, it's 100 years since the death of Lenin, the greatest Marxist to ever live.
Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains.
Cupcake Star with 15 months. Thank you so much with the Prime Gaming. That's right. Workers of the world unite. My kids' school is canceled due to the violence, but they got online classes. Oh my god. Damn near as I could tell, no one is reporting on Ecuador. I don't see much on it. On the program today, Bernie backs the U.S. attack on Yemen. Should come as no surprise. The streets have already charged Israel with genocide. Palestinian liberation will not come through the courts. We have no illusions in the international bourgeois court system. Another article on the ICJ. Solidarity with pro-Palestine activists targeted by the state. And the city of Edmonton kills homeless people. In the midst of a record-breaking freezing temperatures, the police were sicked on an encampment, largely comprised of indigenous people. And we'll get to one of my favorite texts. It's very short. The Three Sources and Three Component Parts of Marxism by one V.I. Lenin. Yeah, should be a good program today, folks. Let's see. Not much violence around here, but my daughter's school is within 2 kilometers of a jail, so they won't be going back to school next week. Do you see where after Germany announced they were coming to Israel's defense of the ICJ, Namibia spoke up and told them to sit the fuck down? Hell yeah. Yep. The colonized will liberate themselves. And tonight's archaeology video, since you guys love archaeology, we are going to, let's see, what do I got? Solutrean hypothesis, retracing ancient footsteps across Atlantic. We can watch that. Yeah, we'll watch that. I actually wrote a paper on the Solutrean hypothesis when I was in undergrad. Oh my god. Wow, it's only 25 minutes. I'll have to find something else. I gotta fill the time. I got so much spare time here. Of course, YouTube's slowing down now. I even disabled ad blocker, fuckers. And yes, even if you have premium, if you have ad blocker installed, YouTube is artificially slowing down for you, and also, I feel my ears. Sorry about that. YouTube is artificially slowing down if you have even if you have premium, and it's causing people's CPUs to like go into overdrive. I notice my CPU temperature goes up like 20 degrees whenever I have YouTube open. All right, so amid crocodile tears for Gaza, Bernie Sanders backs U.S. attack on Yemen. On Sunday, the 100th day of the U.S.-Israeli war on Gaza, Bernie Sanders appears on CNN's State of the Union program and declared his support for attacks by the United States and Britain on Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen. The ongoing attacks, which began on January 11th, marked a major escalation in the U.S.-led war in the Middle East and prefigure a direct attack by Washington on Iran. From the beginning, the Israeli onslaught against Gaza, Sanders has promoted the propaganda line of Tel Aviv and
He was more than a hero. He was a union man.
more than a hero, he's a union man. I love that clip. We got to see both clips tonight. Mark's Daddy with the 12 months. Thank you. Wow, 1 year. 1 year you subscribed to this channel. I really appreciate it. Sanders has promoted the propaganda line of Tel Aviv in Washington that Israel's campaign of mass murder and destruction, targeting defenseless civilians, mainly women and children, is a defensive response to the armed incursion of Hamas last October 7th. While criticizing Israel's disproportionate tactics, he supported the goal of extirpating the Hamas terrorists. He is now providing the same service for the war criminals in Washington in relation to Yemen, just as he ignores the previous history of Zionist displacement, terrorist violence, and occupation against the Palestinians, including the 17-year blockade and siege of Gaza, interspersed with deadly attacks by the Israeli Defense Forces, and casting Hamas as the aggressor. He ignores the genocidal war against the Houthis carried out by Saudi Arabia with the support of the U.S. According to the United Nations, 377,000 people have been killed in the war against the impoverished Houthis, which has employed blockades to inflict mass starvation and disease. On Sunday, CNN moderator Jake Tapper began his interview with the progressive senator from Vermont by raising President Biden's dramatic escalation in the Middle East and noting, a top house progressive, Pramila Jayapal, said the president should have gotten and in fact needed permission from Congress, calling the strikes an unacceptable violation of the Constitution. Do you agree with her? Were these strikes illegal? Sanders brushed aside the unilateral and illegal character of Biden's action, saying, what I think, the president has the right to respond on an emergency basis to the disruption of international shipping brought about by the Houthis. On the other hand, he's got to get to Congress immediately. Congress has a right to declare war, not the president of the United States. I hope this issue gets to Congress immediately. Of course, Sanders well knows Biden has no intention of seeking congressional authorization for the already escalating war on Yemen, nor has the Vermont senator publicly pursued the matter since CNN interview. Yeah, it's worth pointing out, and I don't need to point it out to you guys, but, when it comes to things like minimum wage going up, student loan forgiveness, doing literally anything for working people, the Biden administration is like, our hands are tied. You have to talk to the Republicans like they won't let us do anything, even though we have a majority. I know parliamentarians said no. Right, we can't do anything like that. When it comes to declaring war, fucking let her rip. Let her rip. Fuck Congress. We'll go around it. We'll do whatever it takes. Got all these weapons sitting around here. They're not going to explode themselves. In reality, Sanders was brought into Sunday's program to perform a political function for the Biden administration, the U.S. war machine. His role is to provide a left imprimatur to the latest escalation under conditions of mass popular opposition to the Israeli genocide and Washington's central role in arming and overseeing it, as well as the expansion of the war throughout the Middle East. Sunday's program followed the previous day's mass anti-genocide protests around the world, including marches of 300,000 in Washington and 100,000 in Washington, D.C. There was a pattern of such appearances by the pro-Zionist progressive. Sanders was interviewed by the other host of State of the Union, Dana Bash, on November 5th of last year. This was at a point of rapidly mounting international protests against the war in Gaza under conditions of the daily carpet bombing of Palestinian apartment blocks, refugee camps, hospitals, mosques, churches, and UN facilities, as well as a blockade of fuel, food, and medical supplies. That Saturday had seen large protests in cities around the world, including marches involving 300,000 people in both London and DC. The main demand was for a ceasefire to halt the killing. Asked if he supported a ceasefire, Sanders said, I don't see how you can have a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire, with an organization like Hamas, which is dedicated to turmoil and chaos and destroying the state of Israel. I think that the Arab countries in the region understand is that Hamas has got to go. For all his humanitarian posturing since then, Sanders has continued to oppose the ceasefire, in line with the policy of the both fascist Netanyahu and genocide Joe Biden. On last Sunday's interview, Tapper raised a resolution Sanders was bringing to the floor of the Senate that would require State Department to submit a report on whether Israel was violating international human rights and laws and conventions in its war on Gaza. Under a provision of the Foreign Assistance Act, I'm so tired. Yeah, man. Same. Honestly, this is tired of these Zionists. Yeah, this is really hard to get through. At least we have a bunny on camera. Like, I'm tired of like just the obvious and low effort gaslighting. Like, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. You know? Not that they were very good at it in the first place. But like, you know, for decades I thought, for years I was you know, I was a polite liberal, keeping my head down and be like, well, I don't know, it's complicated, I didn't know much about it. My Jewish friends would often tell me what the situation is, and I would believe them. But I think the zeitgeist has changed, right, over the last 20 years. There has never been this sort of international movement in solidarity for Palestine. And I'm wondering what would it take? Other than our obvious conclusions as revolution. Nothing would delight me more. In last Sunday's interview, Tapper raised a resolution Sanders was bringing to the floor of the Senate and would require State Department to submit a report on whether Israel was violating international human rights and conventions on its war in Gaza under a provision of the Foreign Assistance Act that prohibits U.S. military aid to such governments. Tapper quoted a statement by the White House National Security Council spokesman opposing the measure. In a carefully staged exchange between Tapper and Sanders, this was the cue for Sanders to shed crocodile tears about the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza and prop up the illusion that moral pressure can convince Congress and Biden to rein in the Israeli killing machine, even as it continues to prosecute its defensive war. Sanders noted the indices of mass death, displacement, starvation, and disease taking their greatest toll on children since Israel launched its assault with weapons supplied by the U.S. on the tiny, densely populated enclave of Gaza. At one point, Tapper asked, how can the Israelis go after Hamas if they're hiding among the Palestinian civilians? Sanders replied, Jake, that is a very fair question. As I have said a million times, Hamas is a disgusting terrorist organization. This is not an easy task to go after Hamas, but you don't destroy an entire people in the process. Asked what the Israelis should be doing, Sanders reiterated his call for a humanitarian pause, not a ceasefire, to allow food and water to avert famine. Beyond that, if Israel had to target its attacks, in quotes. The Canadian commie, is that his name? Canadian or Canadian, was covering a worldwide poll showing 20% point drop in support for Israel since September. Wow. The Canadian commie. Can you post a link to that? Is this a Twitch stream? They're bigger on YouTube, but also on Twitch. Oh, okay, right on. Maybe I'll have to connect with them. In the interview, as in many previous statements, Sanders called the situation in Gaza a humanitarian catastrophe. This term, by design, skirts the issue of intentionality. He avoided far more accurate designations such as genocide, war crime, and ethnic cleansing. He made no mention of South Africa's meticulously documented and unanswerable indictment of Israel for genocide that had been presented at a hearing of the United Nations. International Court of Justice just days before, the Biden administration's cynical and absurd dismissal of it as meritless. Sanders always fallen short on Palestine, but supporting the bombing of Yemen is an actual yeah, I would say that's definitely a regression of a stance even 5 years ago, right? As like the lone voice against the Iraq war, right? What happened to that, Bernie? Was he like, he could not have always been like this, right? The Canadian commie.
Taken untold millions. We can break their haughty power.
No, I'll shoot them a follow. They all followed. Wow, I'm dumb. Okay, why isn't this working? Holy fuck, Twitch, was that so hard? Alright. It's former evangelical Christian, now Marxist Leninist. That's a heck of a jump. As for his much vaunted resolution on U.S. aid to Israel introduced under conditions where Biden has invoked emergency powers to unilaterally expedite arms shipments to Israel, Sanders acknowledged that it had no chance of being passed by the Democratic-controlled Senate. Asked by Tapper if he thought the bill could get the 51 votes required for passage when it came to the floor on Tuesday, Sanders replied, "I don't. It's going to be a long, hard process." How his bill could be anything other than a cynical diversion, the human rights supporter of U.S. imperialism did not say. In the event, the bill received only 11 votes on Tuesday and was summarily squashed. The sophistry that underlies all of Sanders' human rights pretensions was perhaps most glaringly exposed in his parroting of the official line that the Biden administration is working to rein in the Netanyahu's regime assault on defenseless civilians in Gaza. This is a corollary of the lie that the U.S. is not directly involved in and responsible for the war of annihilation that will soon enter its fourth month. As World Socialist website has explained, the opposite is the case. The fascist Netanyahu government could not continue the war for a day without the full military, economic, and political support of Washington. This extends to providing direct logistical and targeting assistance for the Israeli Defense Forces' daily war crimes in the enclave. The genocide in Gaza, supported by all of the imperialist powers, is an integral part of U.S. imperialism's strategy of global war in pursuit of world hegemony. It is one front in an emerging world war, along with Washington's proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, its escalating war throughout the Middle East, whose central target is Iran, and its war preparations against China. There is nothing subtle about Sanders' efforts to perform damage control for Biden and the Democratic Party. The basic purpose of the interview was revealed toward its conclusion when Tapper asked whether young progressives in the United States will ultimately rally behind Joe Biden in November, or is he seriously damaged his standing? Sanders replied, "The choice is pretty clear. Running against Donald Trump, I think people will end up rallying behind Biden." This was followed by an absurd and patently false exoneration of Biden for the genocide in Gaza. He has been very clear as he expresses concern about indiscriminate killing. He has asked Netanyahu over and over again to change course. You cannot give billions and billions of dollars to a country that ignores your wishes and violates international law. Well, apparently, yeah, you can. The WSWS has dubbed Sanders and his past and present promoters of the pseudo-left, such as the Democratic Socialists of America, the left face of genocide. His comments Sunday only add further proof of the truth of this designation. Yep. Yeah. I mean, those are like, obviously, you guys knew Bernie a lot better than I did. Those of you who have been following him. It really does feel like an absolute kick in the teeth. When I volunteered my time, even from Canada, doing phone banking for Bernie in 2020, and I wasn't like a full on Marxist back then. What do I have under watch later? I have a bunch of stuff. Okay, what do I got? Economic update, corporations versus... Oh yeah, that was a good video by Richard Wolff. Corporations versus democracy. Similar general criticisms of reformism also apply to Corbyn, but he has remained much more principled and has been made to endlessly pay for it. That's true. And I wonder if they draw lessons from that situation in like the bad way, in like the wrong way about it. I think history will ultimately vindicate Corbyn and his principled stance. All right, so South Africa versus Israel. ICJ genocide case exposes crisis of international law. South Africa's landmark genocide against Israel has attracted the support of millions of people worldwide who are desperate to see an end to the horrors in Gaza. Israel's international reputation has received a blow from it which it may never recover. But a blow is also being prepared for the whole edifice of international law, which is impotent to stop these atrocities. The International Court of Justice is the most important court of the United Nations, which adjudicates disputes between its 193 member states. It is, in effect, the closest thing there is to a world court. Unlike the International Criminal Court, the ICC, which also sits in The Hague, the ICJ does not prosecute individuals. Rather, its decisions are binding on the parties, although the court has no means of enforcing its decisions. In an application submitted on the 28th of December, South Africa alleges that the State of Israel has committed or allowed to be committed acts that breach the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, which was drafted in 1948 in response to the horrors of the Holocaust. Was this before or after the Nakba? Because that occurred in the same year. The genocide occurred in the same year. How funny is that? The purpose of last week's hearing was not to decide on whether Israel is committing a genocide in Palestine. That question will likely be kicked into the long grass for years to come. Instead, the court has been asked to order a provisional measures intended to prevent further irreparable harm being suffered by Palestinians in Gaza. The significance of this case and the parties involved is immediately recognizable. The black majority in South Africa has experienced centuries of dispossession, enslavement, and colonial oppression, and its present government came to power as a result of the defeat of the brutal apartheid regime by a revolutionary movement of the black working class. The State of Israel was established in 1948 in the wake of the genocide extermination of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. Since then, it has expanded its territory through the violent dispossession of Palestinian land. The Palestinian people have been forced into smaller and smaller enclaves, which are constantly subjected to military occupation, blockade, and bombardment by the Israel Defense Force. This brutal oppression has been drawn direct comparisons with South African apartheid, which Israel supported throughout its existence. This case also represents an immense embarrassment for the self-appointed defenders of the liberal, rules-based world order. Those who have sought to rally the entire world against genocide. Sorry, I was distracted by the music. I just let my playlist go, and it's Billy Bragg, "Rich Men Earning North of $1 Million."
You better join a union, brother. Organize today. You'll see where the problem really lies when the union comes around.
Case also represents, who sought to rally the entire world against genocide and crimes against humanity allegedly perpetrated by Russia and Ukraine, only to back with arms and funding of the slaughter of tens of thousands and the displacement of almost the entire population of 2 million people in Gaza. No wonder then that the US, the UK, Canada, and Germany have indignantly dismissed South Africa's case as completely without any basis. And as if to underline the point, mainstream media, Western media outlets such as the BBC and CNN did not broadcast any of South Africa's submissions at the hearing, although they made sure to broadcast Israel's response the next day. The German government has even announced that it intends to intervene in the final genocide hearing as a third party, claiming that having carried out the most infamous genocide in history, there is now some special moral authority on the matter. This astonishing arrogance has been confronted by Namibia, a former colony of Germany, which condemned the shocking decision to intervene in reminding the world that Germany committed another genocide on its soil between 1904 and 1908. The case is therefore deep in the split between the former colonial powers of the West and the rest of the world. One need only glance at the list of countries who have publicly given support to South Africa's application. The Arab League, Bolivia, Colombia, Brazil, Pakistan, and the handful who have come out in support of Israel. To see this case has effectively become a political battle over the crimes and hypocrisy of Western imperialism itself, the only possible result, irrespective of the judgment of the court, will be to further the isolation of the USA and its allies. The ANC government in South Africa undoubtedly has its own reasons to project itself as the foremost defender of Palestinian rights, both at home and abroad, and it must be said that taking Israel to a toothless international court falls far short of what is really required to support the Palestinian struggle for freedom. Nevertheless, the case has provided a glimmer of hope for millions of people around the world, who have protested in huge numbers against their own government's involvement in the slaughter. The Peace Palace where the court sits was surrounded by thousands of protesters who greeted South Africa's submissions with cheers. For months, those who support the fight for Palestinian freedom have been attacked as anti-Semites and terrorist sympathizers. Some have even been arrested. To see Israel effectively on trial will understandably have offered them a certain sense of vindication. At the hearing on the 10th of January, South Africa's legal team set out the three basic elements of their case. First, they argued Israel is committing acts that fall under the terms of the Genocide Convention, which is killing members of a group, harming them, or creating conditions calculated to bring about their physical destruction. In support of this argument, South Africa's advocates provided a concise but horrifying picture of the living hell that Gaza has become. It has been subject to one of the heaviest conventional bombing campaigns in the history of modern warfare, with 6,000 bombs deployed every week, including dumb bombs dropped on residential areas. At the time of the hearing, 23,000 people have been killed. As a result, 70% were women and children. Thousands more are missing, presumed dead under the rubble. Israel's onslaught has made the whole of Gaza uninhabitable. So many buildings have been destroyed that Gaza is now a different color from space. God, I love being called an anti-Semite by people who were giving a standing ovation to a Waffen SS just before the escalation. You gotta keep calling us out like that, eh? No, we joke about this constantly in our reading groups, especially my my American friends in our reading group. Like, man, yeah, I wish I could get bailed out. All I gotta do is don an SS uniform and go to Parliament Hill, where I'll get a standing ovation and a blank check, $600 million. No coincidence, the most consistently anti-Zionist Jewish diaspora has been in South Africa. People like Ted Grant come. Is Ted Grant Jewish? Or is he like a Jewish ethnicity? Born to a Jewish family in Lithuania. I did not know that. New York Jews have also been very vocal, and of course there's the local retired rabbi in my town here, David Mivizayer. See my interview with him on YouTube. every march and rally that I've been to has been a coalition of Jewish organizations and Muslim organizations together, and then they still have the audacity to call us anti-Semites. Netanyahu did the whole from the river to the sea Zionist ripoff, and the tone police were predictably nowhere to be found. Yeah, right? No, I didn't say all Jews were, all New York Jews. But I'm just saying, like, there has been large contingents. Netanyahu over and over again. From the river to the sea, Israel will be. And that was it. Like that's what they're trying to sell to dumb people. And yeah, where's the tone police there? And the reality is they don't give a shit. They don't give a shit about Muslims. They want them all to be exterminated. They absolutely do not care. You see a brown guy and the first thing that comes to their mind is 9/11. Yeah, that guy. The guy yelling at the shawarma cart. He'll not be charged with a crime. He has to do like a course of like sensitivity training. The guy that was like 4,000 dead kids aren't enough. More blood for the blood god. And yeah, he was a former Obama staffer. Send him to the wall. Yeah, the Richard Dawkins looking guy. Yeah, he just has to take a course on something. I love it when these guys, when they ask when they harass these cart owners. You see the one guy that was smiling and giving thumbs up because the guy was filming him, and he's like, "Yep, this is the cart. I'm on 5th and Main. Come on by." He's like, it's like getting free advertising. Israel River to the Sea is in the founding document of Likud, Netanyahu's party. Oh, man. We got some Trump clips to kind of cleanse the palate after this. I want some shawarma. I fucking love shawarma, man. It's like shawarma and pizza. It's like one of those. It's definitely one of those foods. Like I feel like I probably could eat it every day and not get sick of it. Like it's that good, especially here in Hamilton. One of my favorite shawarma shops in Burlington, they have a sign out front. And so I always try and go out of my way to support this business. And I know, yo, petty bourgeois capitalism, right? But they have a sign out front that says, if you can't afford to eat, you eat free. Because there's an increasing number of homeless people, even in affluent neighborhoods like Burlington. Every intersection in the city has people holding signs begging for change. So they have a thing that says, yeah, if you can't afford to eat, yeah, eat free. So I asked them, like, is there a pot that I can donate to? Like, I had $10 in my wallet. It's like, here, can you guys just make sure someone eats? And they were like very, very grateful and humbled. And I'm like this filthy worker wearing my orange reflective vest and stuff. For all they know, I could have been some racist construction worker, but I'm like, hey guys, I think it's really awesome what you're doing. So they get my business, and the shawarma there is really fucking good. All the best Donair shops have Palestinian flags up. Good. More. I was at a Hamilton District Labor Council meeting last night, and 3 people were wearing keffiyehs. Oh, and for the Canadians in chat, if you guys know who Nora Loretto is, I had beers with Nora Loretto last night. She was in town for some kind of labor media thing, and she was invited to come swing by for a social at Hamilton District Labor Council, and we ended up going to Kelsey's after. And so I sat next to her, and then I sat across from a guy from Communist Party of Canada, and so I almost like basically ignored her, and I wanted to talk to this guy. And so we just sort of exchanged notes back and forth. It was a good night, making each other laugh. You know, I call his party a traitor to the revolution. He calls me a reformist. You know, it was a good time. You know, we all talk big game online, but like when you actually meet folks in the real world, like I think 99% of a lot of people are on the same page. Charity is a tenet of Islam. Yeah. Yeah, I think I knew that. Israel's made the distribution of medical aid, food, water, and fuel within Gaza impossible, both by restricting entry and by destroying roads to the point they are impassable. Health infrastructure has been wrecked, leaving 60,000 people maimed by Israeli bombs in a dire situation. The court heard nauseating reports of amputations and cesarean sections being conducted in barely functional hospitals without anesthetic, in scenes resembling something from a horror movie. This is not to mention the lack of sanitation, with a reported 2,000% increase in instances of diarrhea among children under 5, combined with rampant malnutrition into a deadly cycle of pestilence and famine. As much as 93% of the Gazan population face crisis levels of hunger, constituting 80% of all people worldwide in such a condition. The few aid trucks able to access Gaza are immediately set upon by desperate, starving people, as the court has shown in footage. Breastfeeding mothers cannot produce milk, and so mix formula with contaminated water, or increasingly commonly give their babies nothing at all. Indeed, experts warn that deaths from starvation and disease risks are significantly outnumbering deaths from bombings. Meanwhile, even if the war ends tomorrow, over 60,000 casualties might already be inevitable, and the war will not end tomorrow. I'm gonna call it now. I think by the time the bombing is done, well, there will probably be at least 100,000 dead, with maybe another 100 to 200,000 died from malnourishment, disease. I don't know, how many does it take for them to call it a genocide? 2 million? Would they care? But for these heinous acts to constitute genocide, South Africa would need to show that Israel is deliberately attempting to destroy a national ethnic group in whole or in part. In support of this, South African legal team set out a calculated pattern of conduct indicating a genocidal intent in relation to Palestinians in Gaza, who form a significant part of the Palestinian nation. Far from an imposed silence, South Africa noted repetition of genocidal speech throughout every sphere of the state in Israel. For instance, Netanyahu told troops preparing to enter Gaza, "Remember what Amalek has done to you," referencing a story where the ancient Israelites instructed by God to annihilate the neighboring Amalekites, down to slaughtering their women, children, and cattle. Social media footage was cited of IDF soldiers calling for Gaza to be erased, celebrating the destruction of civilian homes, and taunting the Palestinian people. Israeli politicians and the press were referenced, stating that there are no innocents in Gaza, pregnant women and babies are also enemies, and calling for nuclear strikes. Beyond explicit statements of genocidal intent, South Africa's application also referred to the bombing of I probably look really tired and angry, because I am. I'm just gonna move the text so it's right under the camera. Beyond explicit statements of genocidal intent, South Africa's application also referred to the bombing of areas that Israel itself had directed civilians to travel to as safe zones, and the herding of an immense number of people in areas plainly unfit for human habitation, as suggestive of the intention to destroy Palestinians in Gaza as a group. However, the purpose of this hearing was not to establish whether Israel had in fact committed genocidal acts, but whether there was at least a plausible risk that these acts could take place, necessitating urgent measures to prevent genocide. The need for these measures formed the third basic element of South Africa's application, that without the ordering of provisional measures to stop the slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza and distribute food and aid, there was an urgent risk of irreparable harm being done to them. Yeah, I'll say, there's like 4-year-olds dying of heart attacks because they haven't slept in 3 months and their hearts just failed. There are babies that are like 3 and 4 months old that have only known shelling and bombing. In her submission, South Africa's advocate, Blinani Grayle, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, not only pointed to the fact that on the basis of current figures, on average 247 Palestinians are being killed and are at risk of being killed every day, she also drew on past decisions of the court to show that in other cases of lesser severity, such as Russia's invasion of Georgia in 2008, the ICJ had ordered provisional measures. This posed the question quite clearly: would the court be prepared to take action when the state in question is a key U.S. ally? The following day, Israel's legal team presented its defense. Libs keep hand-wringing when people call Zionists evil, yet somehow it's equal to the amount of Zionists, talking about wanting to kill every last Arab in the most horrific ways. I'm so fucking sick of libs, man. I don't know, how do these people sleep at night? Beyond accusing South Africa of having close relations with Hamas, okay, of course, yeah, first, right out of the gate, we're off to a good start here. South Africa is obviously Hamas. They predictably emphasize Israel's right to self-defense in the wake of October 7th, claim that Israel, not the Palestinians, faced a genocidal act. In other words, they say the most heavily armed state in the region is under immediate threat of destruction from ragtag militants hiding in a half-obliterated open-air prison. In fact, Israel wanted to begin its submissions with a screening of its well-known film of Hamas atrocities on October 7th. When this was denied by the court, it became apparent that Israel's defense team did not have much more to say. I'm really curious. I want independent journalists to see this film and critique it and verify it. Israel did not deny the scale of the death and destruction in Gaza, but predictably laid the blame on Hamas's alleged human shield tactics. In fact, by this argument, the Israeli defense team were in effect admitting to the intentional destruction of Palestinian infrastructure and the killing of Palestinian civilians as legitimate military targets. They coined a telling phrase when they claimed that thousands of those killed by Israel were civilians taking part in hostilities. On the destruction of medical infrastructure, Israel cited the overwhelming evidence of Hamas's use of hospitals as command centers, a claim repeatedly challenged even by Israel's allies in Washington. On the question of intent, Israel waved away genocidal statements by politicians, journalists, and soldiers as simply wartime rhetoric and said in the heat of the moment, presumably this was just meant for internal consumption and should be ignored by the outside world. Israel's real intentions, the court was told, were not to be found in public statements by both the president and prime minister, nor in the explicit aims of military commanders, or even in the words of the soldiers doing the killing. Instead, Israel's policy was found to be in the minutes of a war cabinet meeting in which Netanyahu apparently said, "We must prevent a humanitarian disaster." Whether those present in the meeting laughed or not was not recorded. Someone in chat said, like, it's literally in their party's constitution, from the river to the sea, Israel will be. In any event, Israel's advocate argued there was no need for provisional measures because Israel has facilitated the entry of more aid into Gaza. The apocalyptic famine in Gaza is an inconvenient chink in this ironclad defense. But Israel has an answer to everything, it seems, and the answer is always the same: Hamas did it. In fact, Israel's main defense has nothing to do with the allegations raised by South Africa. Rather, Israel denied the ICJ even had jurisdiction because there was no dispute between the parties. Apparently, Israel offered to arrange a diplomatic meeting in order to have a friendly discussion on the matter, and South Africa rudely submitted its application before that meeting could take place. For this reason, Israel argued, South Africa has failed to show the correct procedure, and ICJ should therefore take no decision at all on either the merits of the case of genocide or on the question of provisional measures. Hey, you guys didn't tell us about this. The Israeli defense can therefore be summed up as, if we do wipe out the Palestinian population in Gaza, this would be the opposite of what we intended to happen, although it would be entirely the fault of the Palestinians anyway, and completely justified by Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas. In any event, you have no right to stop us. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Look, we're not doing it, but if we did, they deserved it. Panel of 17 judges, including 2 added by the parties themselves, will now deliberate for several weeks before reaching their decision by a majority vote. Prime among their concerns will be how they can preserve the reputation of the court when any decision they do will be politically explosive. In reality, this case also represents a crisis for the ICJ and the entire edifice of a so-called international law. To reject South Africa's application in its entirety would be to announce to the world that a state can massacre tens of thousands of innocent people from a single ethnic group, all without even a plausible risk of genocide taking place. Rather than making Israel's war respectable, it would simply make the ICJ complicit in Israel's unspeakable acts. Deep Space Renegade says the people of Israel put themselves in this situation by colonizing. Agreed. I said from the very, very beginning, every death on both sides is 100% the fault of Israel. Cupcake Star says, I saw a horrible video of a surgeon in Gaza having to amputate the remaining portion of his teenage daughter's leg. Fuck me. I can't watch that shit. I really can't. It is so upsetting and disturbing. Like, I have, like, just from doom scrolling on Twitter, I have seen some shit that I can't unsee. And, like, I am definitely, like, scarred from this. He had to do it on the kitchen table in his home because the local hospital is gone. Yeah, this is Civil War era surgery is what's happening right now. Pretty standard genocide denial. We didn't do it, but if we did, it was good. Stealing Turkey's playbook on that one. Oh, Turkey called out. Even if the court were to try and wriggle out of making a decision on the merits of the case by accepting Israel's spurious argument that the court does not have jurisdiction, this will be seen correctly as a spineless attempt to avoid responsibility. In effect, it will be a silent endorsement of the forced displacement and murder of Palestinians in Gaza. Oh, Grim White North, don't go anywhere because next article is going to be about City of Edmonton. The Nails, hello, how are you? The granting of provisional measures, even short of what was requested by South Africa, would amount to official recognition that there is at least a plausible risk of genocide being committed against Palestinians in Gaza, which completely explodes Israel's propaganda war based on the constant repetition of its right to defend itself. This would be seen correctly as a spineless attempt to avoid responsibility. In effect, it would be a silent endorsement of the forced displacement and murder of Palestinians in Gaza. Such an order would ultimately only serve to show the complete impotence of the court. The enforcement of ICJ decisions is left to the UN itself, and specifically the Security Council, of which both the US and the UK are permanent members with veto rights. Any measures ordered against Israel would therefore remain a dead letter, just like every UN resolution passed against Israel's occupation. Israel might stop if hell freezes over and the US pulls their funding, but more likely I think the only thing to stop the genocide is the threat of multi-nation invasion. I mean, they're trying, man. Like they're already firing on, they're already firing on Lebanon and Iran, aren't they? Or at least Iran has definitely exchanged missiles with somebody, whether it's I think it's Yemen or if it's Israel. I don't know. I'm a little bit lost. I've been working all week. General Assembly can suspend the Zionist entity from the UN. Yeah, but like anything the UN does gets vetoed by the US. Only from a recommendation from the UN Security Council with the US will veto. Yeah, exactly. So there really is like nothing that can be done other than pulling their funding. Which, to be honest, I think Trump has a better chance at ending this genocide than Biden does. I don't know. We'll see. What do you think? Am I wrong? Sorry, I got a fun Trump clip I'm gonna play after this article. Netanyahu made his position quite clear when he told journalists, "We will continue the war in the Gaza Strip until we achieve all of our objectives. The Hague and the Axis evil will not stop us." Oh, okay. Well, let's see. We find Israel innocent of genocide, and they're like, "Good. The Hague's not going to stop us anyway." It's like, okay, good. Well, glad we all cleared that up. That's why we must disagree with the statement of South African advocate Adila Hassim. Nothing will stop the suffering except an order from this court. We cannot have any illusions in the institutions of international law, which in the last analysis amount to nothing other than a fig leaf for the major powers. If the fate of the people in Gaza hangs on an order of the ICJ, then they are doomed. Only the workers of the world can stop Israel's onslaught, not by appealing to imperialism to restrain itself, but by giving all the support we can to the revolutionary struggle of Palestinians for their homeland, and by fighting to overthrow the imperialism everywhere. That's a good ending. Good way to end that. Revolution in Egypt is the most likely thing that could change the tide in the region. Yeah. Yeah, I've been saying on this channel for weeks, we need a second Arab Spring. That's another thing that can turn this. All right, palate cleanser. Honestly surprised Trump hasn't dabbled in vaguely worded statements suggesting he'd be against the genocide to pull voters. Yeah, like this is a perfect opportunity for him to be like, look, we just want to get Benjamin, who's a great friend, to stop the killing. We'll make a deal. I always loved it when he just framed everything in deals, because like that's his brand. Republicans are 100% on board. Oh, I know. Believe me. But like, if they wanted to like destroy Biden in a landslide, they could easily say, we're pulling funding because I don't want to spend money on this anymore. Do you do the gestures as well? No, not really. Nothing beats the real thing.
Macron, do you know Macron? He's a very nice guy. Macron, and really a very nice guy. I said, Emmanuel, how are you? He said, fine. I said, I heard you're going to charge American companies 25% to do things in Mexico. Who else are you doing? Well, nobody yet, but we will do other. I said, no, but you're not going to do it, Emmanuel. You're not going to, no, Donald, it has already passed. I said, well, you better unpass it, because if you don't unpass it, you're going to pay a 100% tariff on all wines and champagnes that are shipped into the United States starting tonight. No, 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 you cannot do that, Donald. You cannot do that. I said, I can do that. In fact, I'm just signing it right now. No, no, no. Okay, Donald, look, okay, we're not going to do it. That was the end of it, Mike. That was the end of it. It was so easy. You think Joe Biden can tell you about it? He doesn't have a clue. The guy, he cannot, I'm telling you, I saw the other night, he couldn't find the stairs off the stage. He's looking. You ever notice he looks like this? He's finished with the speech, which usually lasts no longer than about 3 minutes, because, you know, the medical stuff wears off after 3 minutes. So he's looking around.
Oh, so good. They don't have the magnets clip. That was another good one.
Almost billion. That didn't work. They had an almost $1 billion cost overrun on the magnetic elevators. Think of it, magnets. Now, all I know about magnets is this. Give me a glass of water. Let me drop it on the magnets. That's the end of the magnets. Why didn't they use John Deere? Why didn't they bring in the John Deere people? Do you like John Deere? I like John Deere. That didn't work. They had an almost $1 billion cost overrun.
Yeah, you pour water on the magnets, boom, it's into the magnets. I'm a genius. Never gets old. At least it's funny. At least yeah, you're right. He is entertaining. Unlike Joe Biden, because like it's the same result no matter what. Whoever gets voted in, you know, trans people are still getting genocided under Joe Biden. Women have lost their rights to abortion. War in the Middle East is being escalated. Like I don't know how many times I can't keep listening to libs like Sam Cedar and ostensibly Marxists like Matt Leck, you know, the producer on Majority Report. They keep saying Biden is the lesser evil. I'm sorry, you'll never hear Joe Biden talk about fucking magnets. I need more of this shit. I need more vintage Trump just bumbling around. Gotta kill more guys and babies, Jack. Yeah, 99% Hitler. Exactly. Moron. Always love it when especially how chaotic the Trump administration was, like the first year. Rex Tillerson would like slam the phone down. He would hang up on Trump and someone heard him and reported it. Rex Tillerson slams the phone down and goes, "Fucking moron." And then he had to do all this walking back in this apology tour on the media, saying he did not call Trump a moron, when we know damn well he did. And I just wish he would go on and be like, "I'd like to correct the record. I did not call a president a moron. I called him a fucking moron." Wrong about water short-circuiting magnets, wrong about it being elevated to launch catapults that are overcost. Yep. Why aren't you using the catapults? Anyway, whenever I need cheering up, I just go and find like vintage Trump clips because they always make me happy. Nikki Haley saying America's never been a racist country. Yeah, I saw that. It's never been a racist country. Yes, you're right. Black people are just systematically poor for absolutely no reason. What is the three-fifths compromise? This is them trying to prevent giving black people to vote at all costs. Oh, man, I needed this Halls. My throat has been swollen for like 2 days. This is really hitting the spot. Tonight's stream brought to you by Halls. Experience seconds of relief when you're sick. And there's a bunny. So, on the other side of the world, there's another indigenous genocide going on because the majority of homeless folks in this encampment in Edmonton are indigenous. Basically, the SCOTUS decided that for the purposes of the census, one black person counted as 3/5 of a person. On Friday, December 29th, the Edmonton police began tearing down the first of 8 homeless encampments that had been deemed high risk by the municipal government. The city and the EPS had hoped it would be a quick business-as-usual operation. Instead, it has been a pointless endeavor, failing to get even rid of the encampments and only succeeding in exposing the most vulnerable population in the city to the coldest, deadliest climates that Edmonton is capable of experiencing.
Stop the sweeps! Stop the sweeps! Stop the sweeps!
It's freaking cold outside, and the sweeps, they're not doing anything. Literally, the cops come in, they move the tents, and the tents move down a block away. And it's just uprooting people in this uncomfortable state. I'm here because I have had homelessness in my family, and my uncle didn't have the help that he needed, and he died on the street. So I think more people need to understand that this is not a solution. People need help, they need services, they need access to services, and they need shelters and support.
These garbage workers should be refusing to do this job.
And they need shelters and support.
This is a city that, on one hand, created an extreme weather protocol to keep people safe. And they said, you know, it's dangerous when cold weather arrives. And on the other hand, they send out crews dressed for the weather to tear down people's shelters. It's so absurd that you could laugh if it wasn't creating incredible pain and danger for people.
Housing, healthcare, anything but warfare! Housing, healthcare, anything but warfare!
An Edmonton court heard arguments on whether or not
There goes YouTube being good and useful. Thanks.
teardowns of encampments could happen a week before Christmas. Joshua Bell felt the need to be there.
It terrifies me this time of year as well, because when people are like out in the elements like that, like you're going to get all the classic hypothermia, like amputations, like it's just frostbite. It's insane.
1 year ago, City News brought you his story after he lost everything in a tent fire.
It's unbelievable how fast these tents go up, and like we're just trying to stay warm. Like it's not easy to take care of each other and take care of yourselves. We just try to stick together and do what we can for each other.
This Christmas, he has a roof.
Fucking YouTube sucks so much. Like, I did what they want. I disabled my ad blocker. The conservative approach to homelessness is just pushing all homeless people out of sight so they can pretend they have solutions. The liberal approach is empty promises and short-term band-aid fixes.
Over his head, reflecting on the challenges he had to overcome living on the street, saying he was displaced 7 times.
Yeah, YouTube lately, I don't know about you guys, even like I disabled my ad blocker and I have YouTube Premium, and when I need them the most, YouTube just fucks up and just adds 20 degrees to my CPU and just slows everything down. And yeah, YouTube's been really fucking annoying lately, and it's not just me. Linus Tech Tips, I covered this. They've pointed out that anyone with an ad blocker installed, is even if you have premium, you're getting fucked by YouTube. If it even detects ad block, they intentionally slow down your connection. Yeah, it's so stupid. So fucking stupid. Courts dismissed the injunction to stop the teardowns because the group that brought the suit did not have a vested interest in the outcome. Like, are people barely surviving supposed to file a massive case against the fucking government? Yeah, right? Like, where are they supposed to go? Because if these people don't have these encampments and you throw all their shit in a dumpster, like even as a selfish asshole, right? I don't want people smashing open my truck window and sleeping inside. My windows have been smashed twice now. Like, I'm a working class person. I got nowhere to put my pickup truck, so it lives out on the street. Bourgeois law working as intended. Yeah, fuck off and die. That's what they want. You're no longer useful to the system, even though I bet you like a good chunk of these people probably do have jobs. You're no longer useful or productive. Go away.
Times in 1.5 years.
That was a very, very, very hard day, and then the following months as well. The mental illness with regards to like living on the street as it is, but to have like traumatic incidents like that happening, it's tough. It's tough water to tread through.
Late last week, it was revealed the city and Edmonton police had planned to take down more than 135 structures like these at 8 encampments they deemed high risk. But a human rights group tried to stop them in their tracks, taking them to court Monday. Lawyers came to a conclusion in court. The deal allows police to move forward with the sweep of the 8 encampments, but only if they follow some conditions, like notifying those living in encampments, as well as nearby social agencies, and making sure there is shelter space, and taking into account cold weather.
Where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed to do? Because we're getting kicked out of everywhere we go. And
well, I can think of a shitload of office buildings that are currently sitting empty. Oh, and the largest shelter is run by the psycho-Christian family of the Alberta Social Services Minister. Oh, good.
There's no structure to anything.
The lawyer for the police chief saying these camps are high risk, pointing to a fatal tent fire over the weekend, and says a man was sexually assaulted by 3 people near another camp. Bell acknowledges there are some dangers out there, but says there's better options than tearing down encampments.
Yeah, so throw their warm gear in the garbage.
No rules or anything out on the street, and all of a sudden you're in a space where it's nothing but rules, and you only get 1 strike or you're gone, right? There's got to be a lot more patience, right? It takes a long time for people to get into this situation.
People are refusing to go to the shelters too, at least in my city. The shelters are not only are they full, but like you run the risk of like getting severely beaten up and having your shit stolen. And so people are actually, they're taking a more, it's less risky to be out on the street.
So I don't understand why anyone thinks it's going to be a day or 2 to get out of it.
The decision made in court is in effect until January 11th. That's when the Coalition for Justice and Human Rights, the group suing the city for its encampment response, is scheduled to return. In Edmonton, Laura Krause, City News.
Smaller encampments away from the city core where people get away from the risks of other camps are also being torn down.
Homelessness is something that we talk about here in Edmonton all the time. I mean, it's hard not.
In Edmonton,
This world's so fucked up. All right, well, let's see what CBC says as to why encampments are spreading.
It's Anson Palmer's fourth winter living on Edmonton streets. With temperatures dropping, he and his fiancée are bracing for things to get tough.
Quite last year, so it gets cold for some of us that have already gotten frostbite. So, and it's a hard thing to do, but some of us like to be out here better than in shelters or something like that.
The couple has set up camp near Southgate in South Edmonton. We met him while he was checking in on a friend set up on Gateway Boulevard. Most of Edmonton's social agencies and homeless shelters are downtown. So why are many people setting up camp further and further out?
The uncleanliness. The places are filthy.
Bed bugs and cockroaches and people stealing shoes off my feet.
It's quieter.
Off the feet.
Not a lot of stuff goes missing or anything else like that.
The future of Edmonton's encampments has regularly been making headlines.
People united will never be defeated.
With advocates who say removing makeshift shelters is unconstitutional, challenging the city and police, who say street gangs have infiltrated some of the camps.
Not only do they victimize, people within the encampments, the crime that's occurring on the street, the drug dealing, is they turn on themselves quite quickly. So they're extremely ruthless, and I could say what they lack in sophistication, they make up for in violence.
A University of Alberta criminologist who's been doing field work with Edmonton's homeless population says some people are avoiding the core
What they lack in
because of gang
sophistication.
One person put it really succinctly, said,
These
I'd
people
rather
aren't very
be
smart, but
here
they're super
and
violent.
hungry but safe than well-fed downtown but be potentially attacked.
Urbanic says she's heard from local street gang members that there's been a collapse in group leadership. She says the street code rules that
Like, how much is a food truck? A food truck can't be that much to come through here once a day. Come on. Like, that would be cheaper than paying all these dipshit cops to come out and throw people's belongings in a dumpster. Like, I'm sure you can find one food truck that's willing to do it.
protect the vulnerable people living on the streets has eroded. But in West Edmonton, people living rough say gang activity isn't the only reason to steer clear of downtown.
The gangs keep their stuff on the DL where it belongs. From a pure business perspective, they don't appear to be at war, but of course they are. And when I'm in a more populous area, what I find...
For some of these homeless folks, a gang is the only thing they have. 43 million police costs in the first week of the crackdown. That's cool. How many apartments? Oh, fuck me. Okay, I'm about to look this up. What's the average rent in Edmonton? The median rent for all bedroom counts and property types in Edmonton is $1,480. It's 0.23% lower than the national average. So $43 million in police. Oh, fuck's sake. What did I say? 1480? You can get that'll get you 29,000 apartments in Edmonton. Now, granted, there probably aren't 29,000 empty apartments. In 2021, there were 40,000 vacant homes. New data shows Canada still has 1.3 million vacant homes. 40,000. The amount. So yeah, it would actually be cheaper than paying the police to put everyone in a home. for the city to just rent these homes out. Well, I mean, like, granted, that's for 1 month, but still. So 1,400 times 12. $1,480 times 12. So 17,760. Okay. 1776. So that's the patriotic number. Remember that. Was that 43 million divided by 60. So that's still 2,421 homes. So that's 1 year of apartments, and there's 2,000 to 3,000 homeless people in Edmonton. Yeah, so with the cost of policing for 1 week, they could have sheltered those people for a year in an apartment building. And you do that and then watch crime just absolutely plummet. Crime plummets and you wouldn't need those cops.
To be the biggest danger is just uncleanliness.
Warren says he's been spending a lot of time at this new warming center on Stony Plain Road. It's open in afternoons and evenings. He heads back outside to sleep, usually alone, somewhere out of sight.
Because that's the one thing I can count on myself being able to do is find a place where the cops won't catch me loitering or dangerous or annoying somebody.
As the homeless population grows, the camps are getting more attention.
Some people are choosing to have their camp a bit more visible, just so that, if there is a fire or if someone is coming and, going through their camp or something, that it's visible and maybe there's people around to help. But it does, of course, also increase the chance that their camp will be reported and they'll have enforcement come out.
The number of people sleeping rough in West Edmonton has also been on the rise.
And truly, I'm hearing about it from people in almost every community I represent, which is something I'd never experienced in my 10 years on council.
Knack says more housing is the only solution. In the interim, he wants to see the province address concerns about the conditions in shelters.
You could do that within a few short years. And in the meantime, you can make sure that the shelters are operating at better standards, so that you're not putting somebody in a position
Fascist
where they
communists,
feel like
thank you for
I'm
the follow.
debating between being warm and safe.
CBC News requested a copy of the province's shelter standards. The province did not provide a copy, and instead sent a statement saying shelter standards were updated last year to include more cultural and spiritual supports, increasing the focus on connections to housing, employment, and income supports, and ensuring shelters can provide a trauma-informed space for all clients. For those still choosing to avoid shelters, focus has turned to surviving in the cold. Palmer says he and his fiancée try to scrape by, shoveling snow for donations and picking bottles.
We're not out here creating trouble. We're out here just living just like everybody else. We just, we do things differently, and we're just trying to get by like everybody else.
Paige Parsons, CBC News, Edmonton.
Fascist communists, hello. What's your solution to the encampments in Edmonton? What are you thinking? The sweep has forced many homeless people to face the winter isolated from their communities, their tents, shelters, and even warm clothes that were forcibly taken from them. Even relative to the already vicious treatment of homeless people under capitalism, this is beyond the pale. It's not an exaggeration to say that people will die as a result. What makes this sweep particularly appalling is that it occurred during record-breaking cold weather in Edmonton. Coming off the warmest December in the city's history, Edmonton saw a steady decline in temperature through January before being hit with a brutal cold snap. An extreme cold warning has been issued since January 10th. Temperatures have ranged from a Wednesday high of minus 21 degrees Celsius to a Friday low of minus 46 degrees Celsius, with wind chills into the negative 50s. Despite this, city and police have continued to move forward with their plan. Tensions over the nearly 2 weeks of encampment sweeps came to a head on Wednesday, January 10th, when at a camp near 95th Street and Roland Road, officers reacted violently to the protests of residents and activists. So EPS breaks up the encampment at 95 in Roland. An elder, Roy Cardinal, is seen with blood in his mouth and is led away in handcuffs after being taken to the ground and handcuffed. The sweep is done at minus 22 degrees, minus 30 with the wind chill. Arm the homeless, that's all I'm saying. Yeah, why aren't they arrested the landlords, man? He's got blood in his mouth.
This is what they call police doing their job, eh? Check it out. All you native people, rise! Rise, native people, rise! It's okay. Tell them to rise. Some sacrifices are okay. Tell them to rise.
Fucking crazy!
Award-winning Indigenous journalist is led away by two PS officers with their hands behind her back at the encampment clearing. She's apparently being charged with obstructing justice, and her lawyers are trying to secure her release. This is a journalist getting arrested, so that's cool. That's normal. Anyway, yeah, so this is obviously capitalism doling out, being incredibly efficient and doling out the best, making sure the best resources get to where they belong, because obviously capitalism is the most efficient and greatest system we can possibly think of. Three people, including journalist Brandy Morin, has shown up to defend the inhabitants of the camps, were arrested for obstructing the police. One of the arrested had a taser clumsily waved near his head by a police officer. For their part, the police have justified their actions by fear-mongering about the safety risks posed by homeless encampments, citing fire hazards, the presence of organized crime, sexual assault, drug use, and untreated biohazardous and human waste. The police have even shown reporters gruesome videos of people getting burned alive. We wanted everybody to understand the impact of the people living on the street and the risk they face daily from dying, whether it's from an overdose in a fire or being victimized by somebody else. These are the realities of the encampments, said Dreischel. In no way are our members going in these sites and being malicious. We're not going in with the intention to upend and displace these people without care or concern. Keep in mind, majority of these agencies are Christian-based and majority of homeless are indigenous. Lots of white saviorism mentality, no shortage of chauvinism, in-house services are doled out. Yeah, that's messed up. So when I hear Christian-based, I immediately think of like evangelical, grifting as much money as possible and discriminating against indigenous people. I'd be surprised if there is any sort of white savior mentality. No sort of chauvinism, health services are doled out yet. So under communism, what do we do with people that refuse to give up their property? Depends on what kind of property you're talking about. Because the people that own, that privately own the means of production will be given jobs. They'll have no choice. We will nationalize their private property under democratic workers' control. That's the first step. By the time we get to communism, this will be long dealt with. This will be long over. Communism is going to take centuries to get to. And it's if we had a revolution today. Yep, there's a bunny. He was having a drink. So these are the realities of the encampments. The man having a taser waved in his face while crushed under the weight of 2 police officers will surely be relieved to know it was not done so maliciously. Both EPS and the provincial UCP government love to remind us that there are supposedly plenty of empty shelter spaces available to accommodate these newly displaced people. The Office of Provincial Seniors, Community and Social Service Minister Jason Nixon said on Wednesday that shelters in Edmonton are currently under capacity and not turning people away. Begging the question, why are people still living on the streets? Fascist. Okay, first of all, I have a major problem with your name, fascist communist. You can explain yourself or change it. I'm not sure why you call yourself that. Communism will not happen in our lifetime, is what you're saying. No, correct. They are the opposite of each other. Yes. Communism is... He's a fash, not surprised. Yeah, I know. The fact that you're asking these questions is super sus. That's all I'm saying. Stateless, moneyless, classless society, probably not, but the basis to head in that direction are existing. Yeah, I agree. The basis for a dictatorship of the proletariat absolutely already exists. And then from there, we can move on to socialism. Dreischel cites an Edmonton Journal article in which one man says he simply did not know that there were supports available and assumed that because so many other people were on the street, that he should be on the street. If Dreischel had bothered to read a few paragraphs down from that dubious claim, he could have read up another testimonial from a woman going by Peaches, who does not paint shelters as a panacea for the homeless that he and the government think they are. People get robbed in shelters, Peaches said. People overdose in there. They are kicked out if they smell or don't look rich and fancy. I don't feel safe in there at all. I get sexually harassed daily. Multiple people affected by the teardowns have come forward stating that they don't feel safe or comfortable in shelters, having experienced theft or assault. The municipal and provincial government's claims of plenty available shelter space have also been heavily disputed by advocates for the homeless who say that these statements are inaccurate. You can't have communism without fascism. What is fascism is forced state control is not similar. No. That's absolutely not what that is. Fascism has its base in the petty bourgeoisie, and it is the weapon of the main bourgeoisie to protect capitalism. Fascism is when the government does things, yes. Yeah, so is socialism, apparently. Like I said, they are on the exact opposite ends of the spectrum. Unless he's like a mega communist Dugin type. Which they're rare, but they do show up once in a while. Multiple people affected by the teardowns have come forward stating they don't feel safe or comfortable in shelters, having experienced theft or assault. The municipal and provincial government's claims of plenty of available shelter space have also been heavily disputed by advocates for the homeless who say these statements are inaccurate. If people living on the street remain on the street, it's only a matter of time before encampments appear once more. Within a day, the recently swept encampment at the Bissell Center had returned. All that expense, all that dehumanization, and all that the city has to show for it is a temporary decluttering for the city, as well as a mass dispossession of homeless people's things. I don't know if Batman is a fascist, but he's definitely a cop, which is definitely borderline. Edmonton Coalition on Housing and Homelessness spokesperson Jim Gurnett describes the process. You watch a garbage truck come in and crush out beds and mattresses and personal mementos, and it just gets hauled away. All they're doing is being shuffled around the neighborhood, losing a whole lot of valuable personal possessions, including a lot of materials that helped them to stay warm and safe during the bad weather. Many were without that which kept them warm, when on Friday night the temperatures fell to 50-year lows. Blood boiling as it may be, though, the encampment sweep is unfortunately not particularly surprising or unusual by itself. It's a part of life in any city under capitalism. Last summer in Montreal, several people were evicted from an encampment that at least one of them had been returning to for almost a decade. Earlier last year, a similar process was carried out on Vancouver's East Hastings Street. In Edmonton, as with any other major city in the country, resources for the vulnerable are under constant threat. Amidst the encampment sweeps, it was recently announced that Old Strathcona Youth Services would be evicted from the building they occupy, with no alternative site found at the time of writing. Notably, Boyle Street Community Services, the largest provider of services to homeless people in Edmonton, was forced to disperse throughout the city after the Edmonton Oilers forced them out of their building, the hockey team's ownership seeking to develop the area into a retail and commercial space. Perhaps realizing just how wretched this makes his government look, Edmonton Mayor Amarit Sohi, after several weeks of largely silent approval for the sweeps, only stepped in on Thursday, January 11th, calling for a special meeting of the City Council where he claims he'll put a motion forward to declare a housing and homeless emergency in the city of Edmonton. The mayor declared that the system was at a breaking point and that the encampments were symptomatic of systemic issues, adding that the number of people flowing into the houselessness exceeds the capacity of our social system. Trump and Biden, what? They're two sides of the same capitalist coin, fascist communists. They both serve to protect capital, and therefore they are, in fact, both dog shit. What's the deal with your name? Because I don't know. The rules are still there, right? When you guys click on chat, the rules should still say no fascism. We don't like fascists around these parts. The mayor declared the system was at a breaking point, that the encampments were symptomatic of systemic issues, adding that the number of people flowing into houselessness exceeds the capacity of our social system. The mayor's idea to declare an emergency after the city and police have forced homeless people into the cold. Creating the emergency is completely absurd. The Sohi and other councillors wanted to help. They would have argued against the sweeps publicly. Instead, they only spoke up when public outrage that pushed them to. For these evictions, the city government and the police have blood on their hands. In response to the sweeps, we've seen community members step up to defend the encampments, risking police aggression in doing so. These inspiring examples, however, are limited by their lack of both organization and strength in numbers. In order to defend encampments in the future, more people must be mobilized, and the labor movement should play an active role to make this happen. Even defending the encampments is not enough. The rotten capitalist system must be overthrown. So long as our governments serve the interests of landlords and corporations, the homeless will always be dehumanized and seen as a nuisance to be ignored or swept under the rug when necessary. So long as capitalism is allowed to exist, empty houses will always be seen not as potential homes for people who need them, but as empty vessels for speculation and profit. To truly make housing a guarantee for every person on the planet, the private ownership of housing must be abolished through the expropriation of landlords. The management of housing must be placed in the hands of the working class and allocated on a planned democratic basis. That way, and only in that way, can we guarantee that no one goes without a home. Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, didn't he? Antagonizing much of the Muslim world. In fact, he tried to ban Muslims from entering the country. And in doing so, he banned Muslims from every Muslim country except the ones that actually carried out 9/11. pro-Palestine peace activists targeted by the state for opposing Israel. Solidarity with the Peace 11. So back to... so this is still local Canadian news, but, you know, back to Palestine. On January 8th, 4 peaceful activists involved in the pro-Palestine movement began trial for vandalizing the storefront of an Indigo bookstore at Bay and Bloor in Toronto. Along with 7 others, the activists known as Peace 11 splashed red paint and glued photographs of Indigo's CEO Heather Reisman with the words "Funding Genocide" below her face on November 10th, 2023. In the following days, this group of activists, professors, and students were arrested and their homes raided by Toronto police, with all the violence and bluster of a drug bust. They were then slapped with the trumped-up charges of conspiracy, mischief, and criminal harassment, which could land them in prison for up to 100 years, all for splashing some paint and putting on some posters. This charge is utterly ridiculous and must be exposed by the entire movement as an attempt to intimidate and silence all those who stand against Israel's crimes. The anti-Indigo action occurred because Reisman herself is a Zionist who started in 2005 the Hezeg Foundation for Lone Soldier, and her husband Gary Schwartz. This foundation encourages foreign lone soldiers to enlist in the Israeli Defense Forces with financial incentives and scholarships. Hezeg presents more than $3 million yearly in scholarships in Israel as a result of their participation in the IDF. Over 6,000 soldiers are supported yearly by the Hezeg Foundation. So this is the nonsense that they keep saying. Like, the news constantly reports on, Jewish-owned businesses getting targeted by protesters, as if like this is like a new Kristallnacht, when in reality, these are very specifically targeted by protesters. Protesters aren't fucking dumb, as much as the news media tries to portray them as. His landmark foreign policy was normalizing relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Right, Grim. That's correct. And where was the outrage then? People talk about like, well, we don't like Palestinians because if you were gay in Palestine, they would throw you off a roof. Meanwhile, like, where was the outcry then when they're normalizing as if gay people have it any better in either Israel or fucking Saudi Arabia? You're saying he called for something called BB out and then helped Zionists get what they want. Weird definition of better job. Yeah. By the way, Jared Kushner also has like a ton of property investment in Israel and absolutely stands to gain from further property development. Okay, so fascist communist, what's your point? You're making a case that on foreign policy alone, Trump is better than Biden, which I think, like, considering that Trump tried not to. I mean, like, I think an argument can be made that like his generals really tried to give him a layup to start a war with Iran by assassinating General Soleimani. Trump, by virtue of being an incompetent moron, managed to avoid any major new conflicts. And so by that alone, you're saying Trump is better than Biden. The Palestinian Authority are class collaborators. And if you're a real communist, you would know this. The anti-Indigo action occurred because Reisman herself is a Zionist who started, we already read that. Since October 7th, 24,000 to 30,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel, close to 60,000 wounded, 1.9 million people have been displaced. The Israel state has made it clear that their intentions are to clear out all Palestinians in Gaza and resettle the area with an Israeli population. These brutal acts of ethnic cleansing are facilitated and perpetrated by the IDF, which Riesman's foundation and thus Indigo's profits directly finance, encourage, and support. Therefore, Peace 11's actions are well within the scope of peaceful civil disobedience. Following the arrest of these activists, the bourgeois press in Canada began a cacophony of slander, smearing them as anti-Semitic. They claim that Indigo was targeted merely because its CEO is Jewish and not because of her active role in supporting an occupying military force. News reports claim that vandalism intimidated Jews, going so far as to draw comparisons to Kristallnacht, when Jewish-owned businesses were attacked across Germany in 1938. This is in line with the standard accusation of anti-Semitism hurled against protesters, as if the only issue people have with the atrocities in Palestine is the fact that Israel is carrying them out. If anyone is to blame for Jewish people feeling intimidated by protesters, it's the hysterical fear-mongering of the capitalist press, which insists that peaceful demonstrations are to be feared. Moreover, many members of the Jewish community in Toronto have spoken out against Riesman, and in fact, Leslie Wood, a York University professor arrested in relation to the action, is Jewish herself. Trump was not able to get it done as he promised and is now blaming former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the failure. In an interview with Axios correspondent Barak Ravid, Trump said Netanyahu never wanted peace with the Palestinians. I don't think Bibi ever wanted to make peace, Trump told Ravid. I think he just tapped us along, just tap, 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 you know? Yeah, that sounds like something Trump would say. It's like you're arguing against your own premise. Yeah, so Netanyahu stonewalled Trump, and then Trump blames everyone but himself because he's supposed to be the deal maker and he didn't make a deal, and then he blames everyone else. Also, why do you care so much? Trump is going to win in 2024 in November. I can tell you that much. Like we already know this. Trump is going to moonwalk to a second term. So what foreign policy is he running on right now? Some have wrung their hands over damage to private property, lamenting over glue and paint, when more than 7,000 Palestinians remain under the rubble of their own homes, bombed by Israel is patently absurd. If someone is more angry than a multi-million-dollar corporation had its crimes slapped in its front doors than the ongoing brutality, occupation, ethnic cleansing in Palestine, then they should quite frankly get a grip. Given the uproar in the press over law and order, it is ironic that HESEG itself is unlawfully recognized as a charitable organization. It violates Canada's Foreign Enlistment Act, which forbids the enticement of enlistment into a foreign military, but the law does not seem to apply to HESEG with the same force that it does pro-Palestinian protesters.
Conscript reporting.
Ilol Dre. Thank you for the follow. Riesman, Indigo, and HESEG are rightfully being criticized for their role in funding and supporting genocide, and activists who vandalized the storefront should be defended for their legitimate act of protest. Since October 7th, protesters across Canada have been engaged in peaceful acts of disobedience and demonstrations against Israeli genocide, only to be met with slander and intimidation. Harassment and arrests. Brutal arrests have taken place. Many have been victimized and fired by their employer. And even students at the universities have been threatened with expulsion or job loss for daring to speak out against the role of Canada in Israel's genocidal interests. The case of Peace 11 is clearly meant to send a message to the entire movement. I am watching English broadcasts to improve my English. Am I in the right place? I mean, yeah, I mostly speak English here. And I speak pretty fast, just so you know. Trump is running on the premise of ending the Ukraine war and bringing peace between the Palestinians and Israelis. Well, that's an awfully tall order. A lot of presidents have ran on that, and it's gone absolutely nowhere. What is the subject? We are talking about Palestinian protesters in Toronto, Canada, that have been arrested for protesting against a bookstore. The bookstore is owned by a Zionist who is funding and sending soldiers to Israel to murder Palestinians. And so they threw red paint on the storefront, and a bunch of people got arrested. And so that's what we're reading about right now. What is the subject? Where are you from? I am from Canada. In her statement read out at a York University Solidarity rally last year, Leslie Wood stated that at 5:30 a.m. on Wednesday, November 22nd, a raid of armed police officers broke down her door and dragged her and her partner out of bed, before searching their home and arresting them. What is violence if not this? What is hate if not this? Peaceful activists are falsely accused for crimes for slapping some paint and glue on a building, protesting against a very real genocide. Yet the police who commit real crime are seen as carrying out justice. Are you a communist? Yes, I'm a communist. The hypocrisy of the state stands out all the clearer when one considers the approach taken toward the far right. For example, the white nationalist group Adelante, who stormed the Montreal office of Vice Media in May 2018. In this incident, I'm not sure how you say this. Adelante harassed and intimidated employees, damaged the documents, and dumped garbage around the office. At the original trial in 2020, Raphael Levesque, former leader of Adelante, was initially acquitted of all charges. However, eventually the Quebec courts walked back on this decision, bringing him back to trial. As of 2023, Levesque left the courts with a sentence that will leave him without even a criminal record if he successfully completes his probation. Adelante is an extremely hate-motivated, self-described neo-fascist, so fascist communist, you should like this guy, organization which was organized anti-immigration rallies, attempted to rile up hatred against asylum seekers, and generally spouts wildly racist rhetoric about white genocide. Do you speak Russian? I do not speak Russian. You know who does speak Russian? There's a guy on Twitch, his name is Kyle Communist. You should go check him out. He actually does speak Russian. The hypocrisy of the Canadian state is clear with these two contrasting examples. The far right gets acquitted, the left gets vilified. Those who oppose genocide are labeled hate-motivated, and those who violently intimidate journalists are let free without even a record. The Peace 11 could face 10 years in prison for the crime of gluing paper to a window and pointing out objective facts about Reisman's finances. This is shameful, and to reference Woods' statement, deeply grotesque and Orwellian. The movement must not back down in the face of state repression. Law and order is only a facade for the maintenance of the status quo imperialist order, and with the arrest of the Peace 11 becomes utterly exposed. Yeah, he is on right now. You should go check him out. He's a communist, he speaks Russian, and he's a lot friendlier than me. He is an extraordinarily jolly fellow, and I really like him a lot. If protest is unacceptable to the Canadian ruling class, then what is acceptable? The over 100-day constant bombings of Palestinians, apparently. Communist Revolution stands in solidarity with those arrested and condemns Indigo for its continued support for the State of Israel and its armed forces. We demand an end to the bombing of Gaza, the occupation, and will work towards an end to the Zionist regime in Israel through a revolutionary wave across the Middle East and at home to bring down imperialism from Canada to Israel. If you could meet Trump or Biden, who would you meet? Trump in 1,000%. In a second. I would meet Trump, and then I would ask him about aliens at Area 51. Because any answer he gives would be hilarious. Do you guys remember when Trump crashed a wedding at Mar-a-Lago? You know, he doesn't do what like you should do as a president, which is like, oh, don't the bride looks great. She looks lovely, doesn't she, folks? He just grabs the microphone at a wedding and just starts riffing on Hillary. And then my girlfriend, when we saw that, my girlfriend and I looked at each other and we're like, can we get married at Mar-a-Lago? Just for the slim chance that this might happen. Because it would be the funniest fucking thing ever. Handpicking one guy for the White House won't change anything. Because our task is to destroy the fundamental underlying relations between people and the means of production. It's a lot more complicated than just picking one guy. Believe me, we have the best aliens in Area 51. We're going to build a space wall. That's how his brain would work. He would immediately pivot to illegal aliens and start talking about the wall that the Democrats never finished, even though they're building it at the same pace as Trump was. I mean, like, if you really want to make a left case for Trump, you could do a lot better than this.
More than a hero. He was a union man.
Hey, Chris, how are you? They were forced to cut parts of the wall because of flash flooding. Oh, that's good. That's good. That's smart. We only want the best engineers to be running this shit. If you really want to make a left case for Trump, I'll give you one. All right, I'll give you a freebie. Trump handed out more COVID checks, more money, and more to more people than Biden did. There were more lockdowns under Trump than there were under Biden, and Biden probably killed more people through COVID than Trump did. Okay, there's your left-wing case for Trump. Trump was actually smart enough to not let the checks go out until his signature was on them. And from a branding, like a branding perspective, like that's actually like that was a solid move on his part. Because, you know, when your refrigerator is full and your bills are paid, and you're home safe with your family away from COVID, you'll remember who fed you. Trump froze college loan payments. Biden restarted them. Yep. Yeah, it feels like a bot regurgitating the standard Trump stuff that's been said endlessly already. Yeah, are we gonna have to deal with this until November? Like, I'm already saying, I'm putting money on it right now. Yeah, I'm gonna bet right now Trump wins, or I donate $100 to the Rabbit Rescue.
Because I'm a perfect physical specimen and I'm extremely young.
At the very least, because like nothing will get better until we have revolution. At the very least, Trump will at least give us funnier sound bites. At least I hope he does. I don't know. This is going to be like more like a revenge tour. Before he ran as president just to troll people. And then he actually won. But like, how do you top? Yeah, exactly. Like, how do you top him going on CNN talking about the perfect health record that he got, even though he's a fat slob and he eats McDonald's like 8 times a day, and then his own con artist doctor was like, yeah, he's perfect. Canada's Liberal Party can't even label the carbon rebate correctly. 2025 kind of scares me. Yeah, no fucking shit. And then there's the underlying like fascist undertones that are coming our way. Person, cameraman, TV. Yep. It's pathological liar, and that doesn't matter to 34% of the U.S. No, because I'm convinced 34% of Americans have brain worms. There's a reason when they ate the people felt better after eating the ivermectin horse dewormer, probably because they actually had worms. What is Project 2025? Same percentage think Jesus will return this year. Know what? Can't get any worse. Jesus come back and take away all the annoying Christians, and we can finally have socialism. Oh my God. Hope everyone had a good week. Okay, this article is almost a year old, but not much has changed. If we're talking about homeless problem, this is why. This is why we have a homeless problem. Well, the Toronto housing market has actually cooled somewhat in recent months, with far fewer homes exchanging hands and for cheaper than the ridiculous highs we're accustomed to. The city is still undoubtedly overvalued and unaffordable, and new numbers from Stats Canada shows part of the reason why. The average home in the GTA, so it's the Greater Toronto Area, going for a price of over $1 million as of January, in the city now deemed most prone to a real estate bubble in the world. It's hard to consider Toronto's currently low prices as a steal, even if they feel that way given the demand the city's real estate market is known to have. Once common bidding wars for homes here may now be fewer and far between, but there is still a glaring factor that has helped make Toronto's real estate market as hot as it is: investors, whether foreign or domestic. Sure, the city now has a vacant home tax, 1% of a property's value. Ontario has a high foreign buyer tax, and Prime Minister Trudeau introduced a moratorium on foreign purchases of homes in Canada for 2 years to help ease the nation's housing crisis. But the data still shows that investors, that is, people who own one or more residential property that they do not live in, are still hogging up a decent chunk of available housing, which has historically driven up prices, reduced supply, and made the dream of owning a home unattainable for residents. According to the newly released numbers from StatCan, a total of 36% of condos in Toronto, which have an average price of $711,000 in the 416, and $687,000 in the 905, are owned by investors. In Ontario at large, this figure is a whopping 42%, with more than 1 in 5 homes considered an investment property. Businesses were also found to own 13.4% of the province's condo stock for investment, which is more of a trend in Ontario than any other province. The report is the first of its kind from the Canadian Housing Statistics Program and uses data from 2020, which notably did not include the tail end of the lockdown era buying flurry amid lower costs and lending rates. Similar studies from both StatsCan and other groups have shown a sizable portion of housing stock is investor-owned, with nearly a third of residential real estate wealth in the province held up by the top 10% of wealthiest owners, and corporations amassing 9% of housing wealth while only comprising 1.6% of the buyer's market. Project 2025 is basically just a game plan for the GOP alt-right if Trump wins, as a way of taking revenge because Biden hasn't quite satisfied their bloodlust. Yeah, no shit. The Heritage Foundation is behind it, so you already know it's hot garbage. Outlawing pornography is one of the main goals. Oh, wow. Yeah, good luck with that. Conservatives are reproducing more than liberals. What effect can that have on the future? I don't know. More dumb idiots, I guess. Like, conservatives and liberals are you know they're the same thing, right? They're literally the same thing. One of them, look, here's the difference between liberals and conservatives. Liberals will at least do a land acknowledgement, and they'll put a rainbow flag on a bomb before sending it off to bomb brown people. That's the difference between liberals and conservatives. Not at all. Yeah, you're right. I just made that up. Number of investor homes in Toronto reached record levels in 2021, with 1/3 of all housing types in the city owned by these stakeholders. One important thing to consider is the fact that owners of multiple properties often serve as small landlords in the city, providing much needed rental housing alternatives. No. I gotta fucking, man, when are people gonna wake up to this shit? Landlords do not provide. Okay, say it with me, guys. Landlords hoard, they do not provide. Landlords are scalpers. All landlords are parasites. Yes, they are. They can go get jobs. Oh, I like that. Where's that from? James from the internet. That's great. At first I thought that was a turd, but it's actually a slug. Or no, a leech. That's perfect. In the revolution, do you know what landlords are going to be saying? Every landlord is going to be uttering the words, "Welcome to McDonald's. Are you collecting points today?" Oh, wow. Thank you for pointing that out to me, fascist communist. I had no fucking idea. What happened to the rights to abortion and gay marriage? Under Biden, especially abortion. What happened to those rights? James from the internet is a disgusting person who's run cover for known human trafficker Bo of the Thank you. Resist white. Never misses. You always come out swinging. Fascist communists, would you be shocked to learn that the majority of Marxists also support the right to bear arms? Talk to any communist, and they will tell you, yes, working people should be armed. We need to have a workers' militia to protect our rights against the bosses. The most sweeping gun laws, under no pretext, exactly. The most sweeping gun laws ever passed were in California, right? As I'm sure you're aware. Under Reagan. Under Governor Reagan of California, because black people were arming themselves to defend themselves from the police. They were the Black Panthers and they were Marxists. And they were probably some of the most revolutionary Americans of all time. Investors are often contributing to rising housing costs through things like short-term leasing through Airbnb, running ghost hotels, something the city has been trying to crack down on, or blatantly sitting on empty units to sell later at a higher profit. Yep. You should ban Airbnb and ban speculation. Notice no mention of economics because there functionally is none. Yeah, these are all cultural issues. Oh yeah, this got way more traction than I thought it would. This is what the DSA is like. I became a murder trolley driver to help fix the trolley system from the inside. And I was like, DSA be like, DSA running left cover for imperialism. All right, what do you guys want next? I had some Lenin. I believe this weekend is the 100th anniversary of the death of Lenin. This is Black Red. I'm following that. Black Red Card is trying to form a Maoist DSA chapter. Yeah, good luck. This is a phenomenal. I use this as an introductory text to for brand new contacts and members who want like a bare bones introduction to Marxism. I don't care, bro. No, I'm not reading that. Because, like, I don't care. Like, I don't know how many times I gotta tell you this. In terms of economics, they are absolutely the same. And the war that the working class is fighting is going to be an economic war. So, in honor of Lenin's 100th, the centenary of his passing, I really feel like we should read some Lenin, and this is a nice short article. The only difference between their brains is how much lead one has been exposed to. Throughout the civilized world, the teachings of Marx evoke the utmost hostility and hatred of all bourgeois science, both official and liberal, which regards Marxism as a kind of pernicious sect. And no other attitude is to be expected, for there can be no impartial social science in a society based on class struggle. In one way or another, all official and liberal science defends wage slavery, whereas Marxism has declared relentless war on that slavery. To expect science to be impartial on a wage slave society is as foolishly naive as to expect impartiality from manufacturers on the question of whether workers' wages ought not to be increased by decreasing the profits of capital. But this is not at all. The history of philosophy and the history of social science show that the perfect clarity that there is nothing resembling sectarianism in Marxism, in the sense of it being a hidebound, petrified doctrine, a doctrine which arose away from the high road of the development of world civilization. On the contrary, the genius of Marx consists precisely in his having furnished answers to questions already raised by the foremost minds of mankind. His doctrine emerged as a direct and immediate continuation of the teachings of the greatest representatives of philosophy, political economy, and socialism. The Marxist doctrine is omnipotent because it is true. It is comprehensive and harmonious, and provides men with an integral world outlook irreconcilable with any form of superstition, reaction, or defensive bourgeois oppression. It is a legitimate successor to the best that man produced in the 19th century, as represented by German philosophy, English political economy, and French socialism. There's these three sources of Marxism, which are also its component parts, that we shall outline in brief. I have a question. Are communists anti-police? Anti-bourgeois cop, yes. I would say so. Post-revolution opinions vary. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll still need some kind of armed, like some kind of armed people's militia, but it'll be like democratically controlled, and basically working people will pick the positions, and it'll be a form of police that defends against, you know, bourgeois counter-reaction, essentially. In the meantime, there's no reason why we couldn't have, you know, unarmed folks answering 911 calls. 95% of all 911 calls are for non-violent emergencies. And so we don't need to be sending, you know, thugs with guns to respond to these. You know what I mean? Police in a socialist society will actually protect their communities rather than gunning down minorities and extorting poor people for their money. If someone is on their way to harm you, you aren't calling the police for help. What are the police going to do? The police are going to come to my house and take a picture of my dead body. How? Yeah, the police are just going to shrug and then leave. Sorry, one sec. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. We're back, folks. Hey, sorry about that. My partner just got home from work, and so I had to go say hi to her. And she brought me leftovers. She brought me leftovers from the catering over at the movie set. It's pretty cool. Just catching up on chat here. Police have no obligation to protect you. This is established. Yeah, the Supreme Court has established that. So I got ravioli, I got mashed potatoes, and I got some fried chicken with a bite taken out of it. All right. Well, while I'm eating, let's watch a video. We'll come back to Lenin. The wifey tax. Yeah, that's good way to describe it. Okay, I have like 30 windows open. I gotta figure out where that music is coming from. Do you guys remember? Does anyone remember this game? Star Trek Borg from Windows 95.
Starfleet command. If you can read us, do not, repeat, do not send help. Relax, warn Starfleet. The Borg have returned.
Borg? Nope. Turn the ship around. Turn around. We ain't dealing with no Borg. Let the Enterprise take care of this one. Hi, I'm Ben Kai, and today I get to finally do a Star Trek video. This one is about the old-timey FMV game Star Trek Borg. Now, FMV games were pretty hot back then, with many game companies opting to do the full motion video route instead of rendering 3D graphics. Mostly because 3D was not very good at the time. No, it wasn't very good at all. While FMV brought real-life images to video games, they were pretty hokey in terms of how they played and the acting talent
Fucking
it drew.
red alert, man.
I got him! Hey! The map to the hideout's in the mine, but you've got to talk to the prospector first.
Meaning B movie level bad. Star Trek Borg was different though, because it had the one and only Q in the game. Any Star Trek fan knows who Q is.
Perhaps I should introduce myself. I imagine you've heard of me though, Q. It's short for Q.
The fan-favorite omnipotent being who is always playing hijinks on the crew of the Enterprise. While appearing to be a bad guy at first, he is actually a pretty swell guy.
Q, member of the Q Continuum, and an all-around swell guy.
See? Q knows it.
It's good to be a Q.
He gets the lead role for Borg, and is arguably at his best in this game.
You want to kill Borg? What's sentient? Yet still barbaric bipedal hominid wouldn't.
Can't say that for the rest of the cast.
Why is it always the difficult species that are the most adaptable? The Borg adapt their environment to suit their needs. True adaptability involves changing oneself to suit their environment. I'm so glad you cleared that up.
Yeah. The game was released in 1996 on 3 CD-ROMs and just looks, well, it looks it kind of well, you see, it's sort of it's just bad. It ran at 15 FPS at a resolution of 312 by 232p. For comparison, here's a 1080p image. Now I'll scale it down to 232p.
Can't see the line, can you, Russ?
No.
You also can't even buy the thing anymore, and no digital store has it. So, guess that's the end of the video. But wait, a man that goes by the name Owen Davies on YouTube has done the impossible, the incredible, the incomprehensible. You can see the errors in the game's filming now. Playable at up to 1440p. That's like 1208 more p. And we're gonna go check it out.
Yeah, I remember this game.
As Cadet Furlong. His dad died at the Battle of
Wolf 359 and found that fleet of ships and found your father and killed them all.
That's right, and he served aboard
And the USS Righteous, such a noble name, Righteous, was hit by an unknown Borg weapons discharge and vaporized. Vaporized. Whew. No trace.
Yes, that's right too. And so Q goes and takes it back to the past. You know, you want to just tell the story? You just introduce the characters.
The bridge of the USS Righteous. Your father's ship.
The Tolstoy just took a major hit.
This is him, isn't it? Well, I can see the family resemblance. Look at him. He's barely older than you are. He shouldn't be at security. But 4 hours ago, the real security officer, Lieutenant Sprint, was killed, and this first-year ensign had to take his place. And because of his inexperience, everybody on board, including your father, will be killed. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Thaddeus Quint. He actually tried to save Sprint's life, but as you can see, he failed, the old goat.
The Borg cube is firing.
Evasive maneuvers.
After the ship is destroyed, Q...
So...
Dang it, Q! I'm trying to narrate a video here!
You're not afraid of a little space-time continuum meddling, are you, Cadet? No, I thought not. Shall we?
I'll take it from here, Q. So Q has sent our cadet 4 hours further into the past, right at the moment when Tactical Officer Sprint is killed. Q assumes Dr. Quint's role, and you can control Sprint and make choices that will alter the course of history. So I'm going to scan the Borg in front of Sprint, because we all know that the phaser would obviously...
Excuse me, am I mistaken? But isn't there a Borg on the bridge trying to control the ship? What are you gonna do? Scan it to death?
Wait, so violence is the right course? Okay, guess I should just shoot first and ask questions later.
Security alert!
Shooter! Shooter!
Shoot first, ask later. That's how this game works. We just shoot everything. Eh?
If I told you to jump into a Signian vortex, would you do it? You're a sentient being of sorts. Try using this.
Oh, I shot the wrong thing. Supposed to shot the console. My bad. Next event. Which one do I pull? Try the first one.
I'm glad that button's there.
This thing is amazing. It has information about places, systems, even people. Look at that. Did you know that Counselor Baraka was a champion horse jumper?
Oh, now it's time to use the scanner. Trying to see if we can figure this thing out.
Why is it labeled?
Oh, look at all these entries. Cardassians, turds.
Klingons.
Honorable.
Humans.
Yep, we're the best.
Vulcan.
Well, we all know that.
Please, everybody knows about Vulcans. Dull, logical, unemotional, cousins to the Romulans. And I hope you're not going to ask me to tell you about them, because I won't. Ugh!
I take it he's not a fan.
Vanderpoel to Sprint. I'm waiting for you down in the core room, Lieutenant.
You do know how to get to the core room, don't you, Sprint?
Nope.
Yeah, how hard can it be? All you do is just talk into the computer and tell him, computer core room, please. Deck 6, computer core room. This don't look like computer control room. Actually, this looks a lot like Voyager's hallways. Oh, did they change this ship around? This isn't like my ship at all. Q, you little dirty trickster.
Sprint, we're waiting.
I believe you're wanted in the computer core control room.
Oh, mercy.
Why? Because I can.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember playing it too, Chris.
Classic Q.
My brother's computer was playing it. My older brother.
It's obviously bored.
Someone they remastered the game in 4K.
Question
Or,
is, how do
into
we
HD,
remove it?
sorry, not 4K.
Sprint, you're the security officer. What do you think?
Oh, that looks really good.
Well, it appears to be a standard Borg type device thing. We could
Leisure
try
suit cube, hell
touching
yeah.
it, using one of these doohickey devices, maybe upping the EMP fields and.
Mr. Sprint is right. Until we know more about Borg technology, I don't think we should make any attempts to interfere with the implant directly.
Yep, totally. I was just totally going to suggest not touching it at all. Yep, but I'm going to touch it anyway. I did it for the lols.
Mm-hmm. Meddling with things you don't understand again? You know, I think I'm learning something here. Hubris. That's what I don't like about you people. Your ignorance of the working of the galaxy is unparalleled, and yet you continue to blunder ahead as if you knew what were going on.
Well, it's easy when you can just reload. Another Borg doohickey to play with. Let's do the most logical thing and merge it with our computer core.
This one's free. Don't do it.
Yeah, I'm still gonna do it.
Idiot.
Q, you ought to know by now I'm gonna do the dumbest thing.
Ensign Targus's implant works along the same basic
Bunch of numbers and a
principles as the
bot.
Borg
Thank you for the
circuit.
follow.
She might be able to interface with it.
Logical. Plus, it looks like it fits there right on your head. Mighty convenient, isn't it?
I've seen her before.
Resistances!
Oh no. See?
She's
I
in
knew
First
this was a bad
Contact,
idea.
wasn't she?
She on total Borg on us. Knock her out with a hypo spray.
All evoked responses are negative. She's as good as dead. No, she'd be better off if she were dead. Maybe you should have just shot her. You want to go back and you want to try that?
Okay.
She's dead.
Come on, Q, you knew that was gonna happen. Let's try putting this Borg doohickey on the other Borg doohickey and see what happens.
Targets?
Hey, why ain't you putting it on there?
I'm sorry.
Oh no. See, I knew she was crazy. I knew it. I knew it was right to shoot her. Give me the Borg thingy. You don't know how to use it. I'm the one that's just. I'm the. Now look what you made me do. So since the crazy lady broke that last Borg doohickey, we've been beamed aboard the Borg cube to go find another one. But personally, I'm ready to just knock myself out and get assimilated already.
Sprint, what have you done?
He sent himself into a Bajani pain trance.
Just end it, man.
Oh my god. I didn't know that was an option.
Goodbye, world.
Oh, smart move. Sending yourself into a Bajani trance before you get Borgified.
Huh? You mean that was the right path? Well, why not?
Away team to righteous. 3 to beam directly to computer core.
Now I've got a whole bunch of Borg doohickeys.
The Borg implant's programming is shutting down, Captain.
Take me to the end of the game, Q.
Oh, all right. Here we are again, back at the beginning. But this time, you are security, instead of that little mouse of an ensign.
The Tolstoy just took a major hit.
Are you going to be able to save him or not?
Intruder alert.
Security, guys.
It's in your hands. Security!
A phone number, maybe? There's only one number I know of that'll knock out a Borg. 8675309. Borgy, Borgy, you've been knocked out now.
The Borg cube is pulling away, sir. It's ignoring us completely as if we weren't here.
It thinks we've been vaporized. For a minute there, I thought we would be.
I wonder what chance the Starfleet forces have of stopping the Borg at Earth.
Actually, they
Nice captain's
succeeded.
chair.
How do you know that, Quint?
I told you already. I'm an omnipotent being. I'm afraid the lieutenant died about 4 hours ago. Not my doing. He was supposed to die. Just as all of you, I'm afraid, are supposed to be vaporized here at Wolf 359. My little friend here. wanted a chance to come back and save this ship from destruction. And to my great surprise, he succeeded.
So you were just pretending to be Sprint White. Who are...
Please. I'm trying to figure this out. As I said, I didn't expect Cadet Kalen to succeed here.
You literally gave me infinite tries. How could I not fail?
If we stay here alive, it corrupts the timeline. Our future, but Kalen's past. What are you going to do?
Well, the easy thing would be to just obliterate you all, but then that wouldn't be fair now, would it? On the other hand, I do want to protect the timeline.
Where are we, Lieutenant?
We are still at Wolf 359, sir. We have jumped ahead more than 10 years.
It's clever. I don't understand. We disappeared from Wolf 359 exactly when history says we did. Timeline is unaffected. We're still alive. Thanks to you, Cadet.
I'm picking up a vessel 34 Mark 216, heading on a course for Earth. It's the Borg.
What are your orders, sir?
We're a Starfleet ship in Federation space. We may be 10 years behind the times, but I bet we know a thing or two more about the Borg than anyone else in this time.
What? How not to die?
Lay in a pursuit course.
This is a bad idea, Cap. Look, I've seen First Contact. The Enterprise wins. There's no reason to go.
Engage.
They are all gonna die.
You're just too stupid to live.
Oh God, that's annoying. But anyway, yeah, it was an old game. I remember when I was a kid. All right, so the philosophy of Marxism is materialism. Throughout the modern history of Europe, and especially at the end of the 18th century in France, where a resolute struggle was conducted against every kind of medieval rubbish, against serfdom and institutions and ideas, materialism has proved to be the only philosophy that is consistent, true to all the teachings of natural science, and hostile to superstition, Kant, and so forth. The enemies of democracy have, therefore, always exerted all their efforts to refute, undermine, and defame materialism, and have advocated various forms of philosophical idealism, which always, in one way or another, amounts to the defense or support of religion. John Delancey got into acting partially due to the fact that he's dyslexic. Really? Man, he's such a perfect cue. He's so good. Marx and Engels defended philosophical materialism in the most determined manner and repeatedly explained how profoundly erroneous is every deviation from this basis. Their views are most clearly and fully expounded in the works of Engels, Ludwig Feuerbach, and Anti-Düring, which, like the Manifesto, are handbooks for every class-conscious worker. Shit, I should put that on my list. Probably read that next. But Marx did not stop at the 18th century materialism. He developed a philosophy to a higher level. He enriched it with the achievements of German classical philosophy, especially of Hegel's system, which in turn has led to the materialism of Feuerbach. The main achievement was dialectics, the doctrine of development in its fullest, deepest, and most comprehensive form, the doctrine of relativity of the human knowledge that provides us with a reflection of eternally developing matter. The latest discoveries of natural science, radium, electrons, transmutation of elements, have been a remarkable confirmation of Marx's dialectical materialism, despite the teachings of the bourgeois philosophers with their new reversions of old and decadent idealism. Marx developed philosophical materialism to the full and extended the cognition of nature to include the cognition of human society. His historical materialism was a great achievement in scientific thinking. The chaos and arbitrariness that had previously reigned in views on history and politics were replaced by a strikingly integral and harmonious scientific theory, which shows how, in consequence of the growth of productive forces, out of one system of social life, another and higher system develops. How capitalism, for instance, grows out of feudalism. Just as man's knowledge reflects nature, i.e. developing matter, which exists independently of him, so man's social knowledge, i.e. his various views and doctrines, philosophical, religious, political, and so forth, reflects the economic system of society. Political institutions are a superstructure on the economic foundation. We see, for example, the various political forms of the modern European states serve to strengthen the domination of the bourgeoisie over the proletariat. Marxist philosophy is a consummate philosophical materialism which has provided mankind, and especially the working class, with powerful instruments of knowledge. Having recognized that the economic system is the foundation on which the political superstructure is erected, Marx devoted his greatest attention to the study of this economic system. Marx's principal work, Capital, is devoted to a study of the economic system of modern capitalist society. Classical political economy, before Marx, evolved in England, the most developed of the capitalist countries. Adam Smith and David Ricardo, by their investigations of the economic system, laid the foundations of the labor theory of value. Marx continued their work. He provided a proof of the theory and developed it consistently. He showed that the value of every commodity is determined by the quantity of socially necessary labor time spent on its production. Where the bourgeois economists saw a relation between things, the exchange of one commodity for another, Marx revealed a relation between people. The exchange of commodities expresses the connection between individual producers through the market. Money signifies that the connection is becoming closer and closer, inseparably uniting the entire economic life of the individual producers unto the whole. Capital signifies a further development of this connection. Man's labor power becomes a commodity. The wage worker sells his labor power to the owner of land, factories, and instruments of labor. The worker spends one part of the day covering the cost of maintaining himself and his family through his wages, while the other part of the day he works without remuneration, creating for the capitalist surplus value, the source of profit, the source of the wealth of the capitalist class. The doctrine of surplus value is the cornerstone of Marx's economic theory. Capital created by the labor of the worker crushes the worker, ruining small proprietors and creating an army of unemployed. In industry, the victory of large-scale production is immediately apparent, but the same phenomenon is also to be observed in agriculture, where the superiority of large-scale capitalist agriculture is enhanced, the use of machinery increases, and the peasant economy, trapped by money capital, declines and falls into ruin under the burden of its backward technique. The decline of small-scale production assumes different forms in agriculture, but the decline itself is an indisputable fact. By destroying small-scale production, capital leads to an increase in productivity of labor and to the creation of a monopoly position for the associations of big capitalists. Production itself becomes more and more social. Hundreds of thousands and millions of workers become bound together in a regular economic organism, but the product of this collective labor is appropriated by a handful of capitalists. Anarchy of production, crises, the furious chase after markets, and the insecurity of existence of the mass of the population are intensified. By increasing the dependence of the workers on capital, the capitalist system creates the great power of united labor. Marx traced the development of capitalism from embryonic commodity economy, from simple exchange to its highest forms to large-scale production. And the experience of all capitalist countries, old and new, year by year, demonstrates clearly the truth of this Marxian doctrine to increasing numbers of workers. Capitalism has triumphed all over the world, but this triumph is only the prelude to the triumph of labor over capital. When feudalism was overthrown and free capitalist society appeared in the world, it at once became apparent that this freedom meant a new system of oppression and exploitation of working people. Various socialist doctrines immediately emerged as a reflection of and protest against this oppression. Early socialism, however, was utopian socialism. It criticized capitalist society. It condemned and damned it. It dreamed of its destruction and had visions of a better world, endeavored to convince the rich of the immorality of exploitation. But utopian socialism could not indicate the real solution. It could not explain the real nature of wage slavery under capitalism. It could not reveal the laws of capitalist development or show what social force is capable of becoming the creator of a new society. Just for a quick reminder, I know we read Socialism, Utopian and Scientific on this stream a while ago. We can always go back to it. It's a really, really good text. It's one of my favorites. Something I recommend to people in terms of, like, you know, what socialism isn't. And utopian socialism essentially is the idea that, like, you know, we can change the world through co-ops, right? One factory at a time by instituting a co-op. and or living in communes just in the woods outside of capitalism. And the critiques of private property are there, but like the closest thing they had really to go by was like the levelers and the diggers revolution in 1649, when they tried the same thing and the state came in and cut them down. Factory co-ops are still also subject to the same market forces and same laws of wage labor because you're not abolishing capitalism, you're just changing the ownership of the means of production without changing the that relationship, without changing the mode of production. And so that's why co-ops are ultimately a dead end when it comes to building socialism. That and co-ops then have to compete with other co-ops because the market forces have not been abolished. So this is why when people call themselves market socialists, they're not socialists. They're just well-meaning liberals. That's ultimately what utopian socialism means. Utopian fantasy. It's not real. What ultimately matters is who controls state power. It could not explain the real nature of wage slavery under capitalism. It could not reveal the laws of capitalist development or show what social force is capable of becoming the creator of a new society. Meanwhile, the stormy revolutions which everywhere in Europe, and especially in France, accompanied the fall of feudalism, of serfdom, and more clearly revealed the struggle of classes as the basis of the driving force of all development. So I read that wrong. The struggle of classes as the basis and driving force of all development. Yes, class struggle. Not a single victory of political freedom over the feudal class was won except against desperate resistance. Not a single capitalist country evolved on a more or less free and democratic basis, except by life and death struggle between the various classes of capitalist society. The genius of Marx lies in his having been the first to deduce this, the lesson world history teaches, and to apply that lesson consistently. The deduction he made is the doctrine of class struggle. People always have been the foolish victims of deception and self-deception in politics, and they always will be until they have learned to seek out the interests of some class or another behind all moral, religious, political, and social phrases, declarations, and promises. Champions of reforms and improvements will always be fooled by the defenders of the old order until they realize that every old institution, however barbarous and rotten it may appear to be, is kept going by the forces of certain ruling classes. And there is only one way for smashing the resistance of those classes, that is, to find in the very society which surrounds us the forces which can, and owing to their social position, must constitute the power capable of sweeping away the old and creating the new, and to enlighten and organize those forces for the struggle. Marx's philosophical materialism alone has shown the proletariat the way out of the spiritual slavery in which all oppressed classes have hitherto languished. Marx's economic theory alone has explained the true position of the proletariat in the general system of capitalism. Independent organizations of the proletariat are multiplying all over the world, from America to Japan, from Sweden to South Africa. The proletariat is becoming enlightened and educated by waging its class struggle. It is ridding itself of the prejudices of bourgeois society. It is rallying its ranks over more closely and learning to gauge the measure of its successes. It is steeling its forces and is growing irresistibly. Yeah, a little shout out to Lenin there. Okay, let's get into some archaeology, shall we?
Hey, my name's Nathaniel Fossen. I'm an archaeologist. I have been for 10 years, and this channel is dedicated to the archaeology of North America's eastern woodlands in the time period before colonization. Today's video is going to be a bit different because Ancient Americas is joining us.
Hello, I'm Ancient Americas, and I'm thrilled to be here today.
I said back in my 4th video ever that I would handle this topic eventually, and it's about time that I got around to it. So we're going to be talking today about the Solutrean hypothesis, which is an idea that causes more archaeological flame wars than pretty much anything else within the discipline.
The Solutrean hypothesis was first proposed by Dennis Stanford of the Smithsonian Institution and Bruce Bradley of the University of Exeter. In 2002, they published their first paper that proposed an idea that hadn't been taken seriously since the 1960s, that certain similarities between the North American Clovis culture and the Western European Solutrean culture suggested that the Clovis people were really the descendants of a pioneering group of Solutreans from Western Europe, who traveled by boat across the northern Atlantic to the Americas. Soon after, the Solutrean hypothesis exploded in popularity in news media and on the internet.
This wasn't only a phenomenon in the press. In one of my first archaeology classes as an undergraduate student, the Solutrean hypothesis was taught as a possible alternative to the more traditional hypothesis that indigenous peoples of the Americas had come from Siberia, either through an ice-free corridor or along a Pacific coastal route. It was an idea that we were taught to take seriously as scientists. By 2012, Bradley and Stanford were ready to present their hypothesis in a full book detailing their evidence. This book, Across Atlantic Ice. It was strange in 2012 and is even stranger now, but this book still talked about the Clovis complex as though it was the product of relatively recent settlers to the Americas, starting around 13,000 years ago and ending somewhere around 12,600 years ago. Clovis was the oldest tool-making tradition that archaeology could identify without needing a carbon date for verification because of how distinctive the Clovis fluted biface is. Eastern pre-Clovis technology, like what we see at Cactus Hill and the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, doesn't have features that are visibly diagnostic. But even when this book was written, we knew there were pre-Clovis components at several sites in the eastern woodlands.
Stanford and Bradley framed their hypothesis as a solution to an archaeological problem. Put simply, they observed that Clovis technology should have derived from some earlier technology that looked similar to Clovis, just as the subsequent Folsom technology derived from Clovis.
A Scientologist now.
A few of the hallmark features of the technological ancestor to Clovis should include things like large biface tools, large prismatic blade production, very thin bifacial spears, and knives made with extensive overshot flaking, as well as bone or ivory tools. If all that sounds very technical, that's because it is. I'll let Nathaniel explain since he's much more experienced than me in lithics.
In the study of stone tools, a central focus is the bifacial tool. Bifaces are chipped out of silica-rich stone, like chert, rhyolite, and obsidian. They're flat and come to an edge all the way around, with flake scars on either side produced by the reduction process. An overshot flake is one that leaves behind a wide scar across the face of the biface, and goes all the way across the center of the piece, almost to or slightly past the opposite edge. It removes a lot of material at once, but an improper execution can destroy the tool, ripping off the cutting edge on the other side. When executed correctly, overshot flaking produces very wide and thin bifaces that are very effective projectile weapons. By contrast, a blade is a long, thin, and ideally flat flake with a razor-sharp cutting surface around the edges. Large blade tools are associated with the broader Clovis toolkit, but they fall out of fashion and reappear sporadically in the Archaic and Woodland periods.
If Clovis technology was invented by relatively recent migrants from Siberia or Alaska, then those technologies from around 18,000 to 15,000 years ago should have some or most of these features. However, the technology in Beringia just before Clovis is characterized by microlithic technology. These are very small flake tools glued into wood or bone handles. They have almost nothing in common with Clovis. This incongruity between Clovis technology and the microlithic tradition from the purported ancestral homeland of Clovis never made much sense. And more recent work has shown that the sites with the earliest Clovis dates are found further south and east, with a pattern expanding north and west over time. It moves in the wrong direction.
Stanford and Bradley's solution to this problem is what archaeologists call the Solutrean hypothesis. They argue that the ancestors of the Clovis culture did not come from Beringia. Instead, an earlier group of people from the Solutrean culture traveled by boat from Western Europe across the Atlantic. At this time, the northern part of the ocean was covered in sea ice that marine mammals like seals lived on. These Solutrean ancestors hunted these animals farther and farther out to sea until they reached the shores of North America, somewhere around modern-day Maryland. The Solutrean stone and bone toolkits they brought with them were ancestral to the pre-Clovis and Clovis technologies seen in the eastern woodlands between about 16,000 and 12,600 years ago, similar to how Caribbean barbacoa forms the technological ancestor to Rodney Scott's South Carolina barbecue.
So what are these similarities that Bradley and Stanford were seeing? It isn't just that Clovis and Solutrean toolkits included large bifaces that were often manufactured with the overshot technique. At Paleo-American sites like the Anzac site in Montana, archaeologists recovered beveled bone rods that are shaped and beveled the same way as Solutrean bone rods, and both are believed to have worked as projectile weapons. Both cultures have produced similar bone artifacts that have the same zigzag pattern carved into the base. Coincidence?
Clovis people had a practice of burying caches in strategic locations as they moved into the southwest and up the Rockies. These caches are frequently filled with extra large Clovis bifaces made from chert that came from a long distance away, sometimes hundreds of miles away. Occasionally, other objects were included in the caches. The Anzac cache included 10 cores for making flake tools, 55 early-stage Clovis preforms, 5 late-stage Clovis preforms, 8 complete Clovis points, and 6 of those polished bone rods I talked about before. All this was covered in red ochre, which is a mineral commonly associated with burials and cave paintings all over the world. At least one Solutrean cache has also been identified, called the Volgu cache. This was a collection of at least 15 Solutrean laurel leaf bifaces made with banded Turonian flint from over 100 miles to the northwest. The bifaces themselves are all much longer and wider than the average laurel leaf, but are proportionally thinner. They're extreme works of craftsmanship.
The Kinmar biface is the only known example of a laurel leaf-shaped biface made of material from the American side of the Atlantic that may have been made with the overshot technique. This was dredged up by a scallop harvesting boat off the coast of Virginia. It came up with some mastodon bones dated to about 23,000 years ago, which is often presented as evidence that the point itself is from the Pleistocene.
Both technologies also happen to include hide-scraping tools made from large and especially long blade flakes. The culture that descends from Solutrean built structures that had impressed pebble flooring, and there is at least one Clovis structure at the Galt site in Texas with a similar square pebbled floor. To be perfectly honest, for two groups of people like Clovis and Solutrean to independently develop this specific set of tool-making practices and toolkits on two different continents should not be a coincidence. The chances of that happening are astronomical. Both share quirks and idiosyncrasies that are extremely rare among stone tool-making cultures.
Bradley and Stanford say explicitly that this is a hypothesis, and it should only be taken seriously if it is tested scientifically and holds up to scrutiny. There are two basic components for us to test. First, if a group of people ancestral to the Clovis culture migrated to America from Europe, there should be a genetic signature in America, probably concentrated in the eastern woodlands that descends from hunter-gatherers in Western Europe from somewhere between 25,000 to 18,000 years calibrated BP. And second, pre-Clovis technology should be more similar to Solutrean and to Clovis than Solutrean and Clovis are similar to each other. According to Bradley and Stanford, the technological traits expected are expressed in Solutrean technology, and the pre-Clovis sites at Meadowcroft, Page Ladson, and Cactus Hill provide the missing link between the two.
So notice the
Clovis, then Solutrean and Clovis are similar to each other. According to Bradley and Stanford, the technological traits expected are expressed in Solutrean technology, and the pre-Clovis sites at Meadowcroft, Page Ladson.
So every pre-Clovis site is noted to be in the eastern woodlands. You would expect early pre-Clovis sites to be over on the west side. So it's certainly a curious hypothesis.
And Cactus Hill provide the missing link between the two.
Moving forward, it's important to keep in mind that we're not questioning whether or not Solutrean people could have taken boats across the Atlantic. I'm certain that they could have if given the time and motivation to do so. But archaeology is not about what could have happened. We want to know what did happen.
That's right.
The first thing we need to assess is the genetic question. Up front, I want to make it extremely clear that the Solutreans lived in Europe, but they were not people who we would consider to be Europeans in an ethnic, genetic, or cultural sense. Generally speaking, the people who are considered ethnically European today are the result of at least 3 major waves of migration. The early hunter-gatherer groups of Eurasia, followed by the first farmers from Anatolia into Europe starting around 10,000 years ago, and finally, the movement of Bronze Age pastoralists from the Eurasian steppe something like 4,000 years ago. The Solutreans lived more than 10,000 years before that combination of ancestries existed. The Solutrean hypothesis has been accused of having Eurocentric or white supremacist implications, but I think it's pretty clear that that is not the case with Stanford and Bradley's work.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair criticism, and I think that's also a very fair response. Is this predates all known like European settlement of what we would consider to be white people, and this has been taken in the wrong way, and that these guys are trying to argue that it was actually white people that settled North America, when in fact that's not at all what they're trying to do.
What people on the internet have done with their research is another story altogether. With that out of the way, I'll turn things over to Ancient Americas.
Thanks, Nathaniel. Genetics has become a very important field in understanding the movement of human populations. By comparing the DNA of modern human populations with DNA recovered from ancient humans, scientists can piece together the movement and development of their descendants. This has shed a lot of important light on our understanding of human migration and settlement in the Americas. If the Solutrean model is correct, people from Western Europe should have arrived in the Americas between 18,000 to 15,000 years ago. Assuming that any of them survived and passed on their genes to modern Native American descendants, there should be detectable genetic traces in ancient and modern humans. I do want to mention a quick caveat, and that is that when we look at indigenous North American genetic evidence, both modern and ancient, we are looking at small sample sizes that are probably not giving us a complete picture. It goes without saying that our understanding could change at any time with a new discovery. So with that out of the way...
Note, pay attention to this one, haplotype X. So haplotype X appears in like Southeast Europe and Asia Minor, and then stretches all the way across.
Does the current
and ends up in North America. And right around this time it was supposed to arrive. Remember, this was all a massive ice sheet, so the Arctic Circle was completely frozen over.
Genetic evidence show any ancient lineages that could have derived from a European source. Some proponents of the Solutrean hypothesis have pointed to the presence of haplogroup X as a link between North American indigenous groups and peoples living in Europe. A haplogroup is a group of people that share specific genes that are derived from a common ancestor. Haplogroup X is found in indigenous North American populations and in modern European and North African populations. At first glance, this looks very compelling, and it's tempting to trace an imaginary line between North America and Europe and speculate that there was a migration. However, the genetic picture is actually more complicated. What many fail to realize is that the populations in Europe and North America belong to different clades or subgroups of haplogroup X. Europeans with haplogroup X lineage are in the X2b, X2d, and X2c clades, while Native Americans with haplogroup X lineage are in the X2A and X2G clades. This is important because geneticists can see that those lineages in America do not descend from the lineages in Europe. Actually, neither of them are derivative from the other. A good way to think of this connection is as a cousin relationship rather than a parent-child relationship. These X2 clades all appear to have a common ancestor in Eurasia long ago, but where and when this split occurred is still not known for sure. Although no known lineage ancestral to X2A has yet been identified, an interesting
The split occurred over disagreements over whether or not the Soviet Union was socialist or a state capitalist or a degenerated worker state.
hint may come from the remains of a Botai boy from the Altai Mountains. His DNA was sequenced and found to have been part of the X haplogroup. But these remains are only 9,000 years old, and there's no way to prove that those populations were there any earlier. The oldest known remains in North America with the X haplogroup come from the Kennewick man in Washington state, all the way on the other side of the continent, and his genetics show no European ancestry. So what do current genetic studies say about the origins of Native Americans? Currently, the consensus is that the ancestors of Native Americans descended from northern Siberian and East Asian populations approximately 25,000 years ago. For thousands of years, this new ancestral population was isolated and developed several distinct genetic traits that they would pass to modern indigenous Americans. Sometime about 16,000 to 13,000 years ago, that population began to grow and diversify rapidly, and this is likely due to the fact that they had moved into the Americas and were spreading out across the continent. The data available shows that indigenous peoples are genetically descended from Asian populations. This leaves us with two scenarios to reconcile the available data with the Solutrean hypothesis. The first is that Solutreans came to the eastern woodlands and were the first humans to arrive there. In this scenario, they would have spread out and grown until they met the ancestors of modern Native Americans who replaced them but also adopted their Solutrean technology. This is possible. There are documented examples of genetic populations dying out and leaving no living descendants, but it's not very likely. Clovis populations appear to have been fairly high to leave such a massive archaeological footprint in under 800 years. And their descendants, like the Folsom and Dalton cultures, are also very prolific.
The second scenario would involve the Solutreans arriving in an already populated land, where they encountered the inhabitants, passed on their technology, but did not produce any surviving offspring with them. Again, this is possible, but very unlikely.
So now we have to evaluate if the material culture of the Solutreans was actually ancestral to pre-Clovis and eventually Clovis itself. What about all of those similarities between the two material cultures?
First and foremost, we have to check out the bifaces themselves. Then we'll talk about how they were made. Two main types of Solutrean bifaces are presented as comparable to later Paleo-American bifaces. These are the laurel leaf types and the indented base types. Indented base points have a very similar outline to Clovis points, but most of them aren't actually bifaces. Instead, they're made by retouching a prismatic blade into a Clovis-ish outline. The ones that are bifaces tend to be much more heavily worked on one side than the other, so you get these big unworked areas on a single side.
These are the earliest artifacts we find in Ontario. We do get some fluted points as well. We call them Gainey points, but we don't call them Clovis points here. But these are very similar to some of the stuff I found.
From what I've seen of these, they're made much more like the more common specimens of post-Clovis Dalton points than Clovis or even pre-Clovis triangulars. Laurel leaf types look like this. They're pointed on either end, but one end is wider than the other. These are very thin and tend to be on the larger end of the spear/knife category. They don't look like anything from the Clovis technological tradition, but they have an important manufacturing feature that they share with Clovis: overshot flaking. An overshot is a wide flake that is struck off of one edge of a biface and removes material all the way across to the other edge. This seems counterproductive. You're removing from the cutting edge. But if you start out with a really wide preform, it can be an effective way to thin a biface quickly. And a thin, wide biface penetrates those shaggy mammoth hides better, and it gets you and your family a delicious rib dinner, garlic mashed potatoes not included. The catch is that it's a very difficult maneuver to be able to pull off on command.
The potato being in South America.
Only two cultures identified in the archaeological literature use overshot flaking as a regular manufacturing technique. Those are Solutrean and Clovis, and that's actually a problem for the Solutrean hypothesis. What Stanford and Bradley are arguing is that Solutrean knappers had this overshot-based manufacturing tradition, brought it to America, forgot it for 5,000 years during the pre-Clovis era, and then relearned it just in time to develop the Clovis point. This isn't just the case with overshot flaking. Stanford and Bradley did a statistical analysis called cluster analysis on a range of toolkits from Beringia, Paleo-America, and the European late Paleolithic. Basically what this does is it sorts a bunch of different sets of data by how similar each set is to all the others. And it looks like this. On this first dendrogram comparing the types of tools in each group, you see that pre-Clovis is most similar to the Beringian Ushki early Juktai cultures, and then those two and Mesa Sluisway toolkits are more similar to each other than they are to the Nenana toolkits, and so on and so on. Remember that under Stanford and Bradley's hypothesis, we should see a natural step-by-step process where Solutrean transforms into pre-Clovis, which then transforms into Clovis. But this analysis shows that pre-Clovis toolkits are closest to all of the Siberian and Beringian toolkits. What about the methods used to make those tools, though? Here's their dendrogram for the technological features, and it's pretty different. Here, fluted Clovis points are much more similar to the late French Solutrean, and then those two pair off with the middle French Solutrean, which goes with North Spanish Solutrean, and then finally pairs with pre-Clovis. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the same dendrogram, you see how the pre-Solutrean Gravettian technology and the post-Solutrean Magdalenian pair off, which then pair off with early French Solutrean. What this means is that Clovis and the mid to late French Solutrean are more similar to each other than either is to the technological tradition that came immediately before themselves. This pattern is exactly what convergent evolution looks like. This evidence that in complete defiance of all the odds, people in America retraced the technological steps taken by people in Europe instead of being taught by those Europeans is presented in Stanford and Bradley's own book. What about the other similarities, though? The pebble-paved floors are interesting, but the Solutreans never made them as far as we know. That's a later Magdalenian feature. The caching connection seems compelling until you actually look at the sample sizes and the contents of the caches themselves. David Kilby has a great analysis of this that I'll link in the description. First off, Stanford and Bradley claim that there are many known Solutrean caches, but the reality is that only one has ever been documented, the Volgu cache. And this single example is full of laurel leaf bifaces that were completely finished. They were larger than the normal utilitarian versions and were so thin that if anyone ever did use one, it could never be repaired when it broke. Clovis caches are typically the exact opposite. They contain a range of material at various stages of manufacture, and they're all made proportionally so that you can get expedient blades and repairable bifaces for a long time after you start using them. Volgu looks like a symbolic gesture, while the Clovis caches generally look more like supplies that were meant to be recovered and used, either by a living human or by the Anzac child himself in the afterlife. The Kinmar biface is certainly...
So this is why when we study artifacts, again, this is where dialectics comes in, right? When we study artifacts, we don't study them in a vacuum. In a vacuum on their own, Solutrean looks very similar to Clovis, but we have to study how they are related to other artifacts that are found with them. And then what we find, this has changed my mind, what we find is like the bifaces in Solutrean are found, they're large and they're found on their own. They cannot be resharpened because they're so thin, even though they use the same flaking technique as Clovis. And what we see in Clovis sites, on a Clovis cache, we see, like I said, supplies. These are tools in various stages of completion and ready to be picked up and used when they need one in a hurry. This speaks more to people surviving and living off the land, whereas this is, seems more ceremonial. So again, like different caches, different meanings. So again, like the relations between the two flakes, the two objects, is also super important to consider.
Like a symbolic gesture, while the Clovis caches generally look more like supplies that were meant to be recovered and used, either by a living human or by the Anzac child himself in the afterlife. The Kinmar biface is certainly very intriguing, but there's a lot to remember with that story. The biface and the mastodon bones were dredged up by a boat scraping along the ocean floor for shellfish. There's no reason to believe that the biface actually came from the same place as the bones. They could have been from miles apart. The other thing is that Kinmar doesn't really look Solutrean.
These are the ones that were found on the East Coast in Virginia.
Solutrean bases are pointed, and Kinmar is deliberately rounded with small finishing flakes along the base. It's also curved in profile, which is unlike the Solutrean specimens. There have been other vaguely laurel leaf-shaped points found in the same area around the Chesapeake. But here's the thing. The lithic materials around that area are hard to work with, and the easiest shape for a napper to make is the laurel leaf. It's not surprising that a group would come up with that shape independently at all. Honestly, I'm surprised we don't see it more often.
We could go on, but I think you get the idea. The Solutrean hypothesis, as fantastic as it sounds, was a really compelling idea that really spurred a lot of good research, and it was based on some legitimate archaeological data and principles. Dennis Stanford was an excellent archaeologist, and Bruce Bradley is still known as one of the most proficient flint knappers out there. These guys had every reason to be confident that they were onto something big. But the work that's been done in the last 2 decades has not provided new evidence for it, as Stanford and Bradley hoped. And unfortunately, the evidence continues to mount against it, particularly in the realm of genetic research.
Of course, we might learn something new in the coming years that makes us reevaluate the situation. But to be perfectly honest, I don't think that's likely. The few genetic analyses we have from the archaic period bodies at Wendover all the way back to the 14,000-year-old human fecal remains from Paisley Caves show that these earliest people were directly ancestral to modern Native Americans with no ties to ancient Europeans. It's shocking that Solutrean knappers devised one of the most elaborate and idiosyncratic tool-making traditions ever seen, only to have knappers in America retrace those bizarre steps from a completely different starting point, and then add even more complexity to it. But as of right now, in 2024, that is the most parsimonious explanation to synthesize the huge body of evidence we have in front of us. That's all we have to say about that. I want to thank Ancient Americas for helping me write and research this episode. We're looking forward to reading all of your questions down in the comments section, and until next time, thank you for watching.
Interesting. Yeah, so I was an undergrad. I was in like my first or second year. Hey, 5%. Come at just at the right time. Yeah, it has been a hot minute. So the Solutrean hypothesis came out when I was an undergrad. That was oh my god, but to date myself. Wow, 2024. I started my undergrad in 2004. Unbelievable. So the Solutrean hypothesis started to make the waves, and made an impressionable young undergrad be interested in it. So I have one of the original I just happen to have one of the original papers that was published. Oh no, this is a rebuttal. So in the year 2000, this guy wrote a rebuttal refuting the Solutrean hypothesis. Now, they're not saying North America was settled first by Europeans. It was just like, it's entirely possible that multiple waves from different directions of people settled North America. The Solutrean techno-complex of southern France and the Iberian Peninsula is an impossible candidate as the source for either pre-Clovis or Clovis traditions in North America. Primarily, this is because the Solutrean ended circa 16,500 to 18,000 BP. That stands for before present. A long time ago, archaeologists stopped using the terms before Christ because it's a stupid term to use. At least 5,000 years before Clovis appeared. So don't forget, it's a 5,000 year gap between Solutrean and Clovis. And there's also 5,000 miles of ocean between Solutrean and Clovis. It was separated from the U.S. eastern seaboard by 5,000 kilometers of ocean. In addition, there are major differences between the Solutrean and Clovis in terms of composition of lithic and osseous technologies, and so meaning bone, and with regard to evidence of artistic activity. Nor is there any evidence that Solutrean people had navigation, deep-sea fishing, or marine mammal hunting capacities that could have made a transatlantic crossing even conceivable. Furthermore, there is no evidence that people lived above 48 degrees north latitude in Western Europe during the last glacial maximum, making a jumping-off point from then largely glaciated area of the current British Isles unlikely. The peopling of the Americas, even if the result of several migrations, was from Asia. Done. So this guy goes through the various problems. This is from the year 2000. So the Solutrean represents the material evidence of the cultural adaptations of human groups surviving in the refugia of southwest Europe during the last glacial maximum. This was a time of inventiveness and ingenuity under environmental and resource stress. The creativity of the Solutrean extended beyond the arms race that is attested by the plethora of lithic and antler point sizes and types, even backed microblade elements, and by the invention of the spear thrower. It included new strategies for specialized land-based herd game hunting, including the swift, wary, cliff-dwelling ibex, supplemented by the use of littoral and riverine but not oceanic food resources. It was also characterized by a wealth of artistic and marketing activities, no doubt related to social and ideological developments that helped humans cope with hard times. Significantly, Solutrean hunter-gatherers did not extend their range anywhere far enough north to put them in a geographic position to ever cross the North Atlantic to America, either on ice floes or on boats. Nor is there any evidence that they were skilled seafarers or marine mammal hunters. 200 human generations. 5,000 kilometers from the U.S. eastern seaboard, the Solutrean techno-complex ended 5,000 radiocarbon years before the appearance of Clovis. Far more diverse in its lithic and organic technologies than Clovis, and characterized by an artistic tradition that is absent from Clovis, what the Solutrean would mainly seem to share with Clovis are concave base, bifacially worked points. Yet such pieces in the Solutrean are found only at a handful of sites in a small area of northern Spain, not in France or the rest of Iberia. Nor are the Solutrean points fluted, a feature which is absolutely diagnostic of Clovis points. Shouldered and stemmed points, as well as microblades, all so common in the Solutrean, are completely absent from the Clovis lithic repertory. And beveled antler points, or foreshafts, common in the Solutrean, are very rare in Clovis. Thus, the most parsimonious explanation for the superficial similarities between the Solutrean and Clovis is the well-known but under-acknowledged phenomenon of technological convergence or parallelism. In short, there are only a limited number of ways in which to make a projectile point or a knife out of stone. Invasive retouch by pressure flaking, or by hard or soft direct or indirect percussion. So pressure flaking is like, basically you're using an antler to make notches in the chert rather than using a hammerstone. It includes ribbon removals, with overshooting for bifacial thinning is among them. Has long been known, the prehistory of the world is replete with examples of bifacial foliate points. Just within Europe, not to mention Africa and Siberia, bifacial foliates reoccurred in the Middle and Upper Paleolithic, as well as the Chalcolithic and the Bronze Age in different regions. It is a technological practice that had been invented and reinvented time and again to fulfill a set of specific purposes, namely the killing and or butchering of animals. Such convergence is recognized today in Europe, since bifaces span such vast distances of space and time that the search for genetic relationships now seems to be a futile exercise. Similarly, there are only limited numbers of effective hafting treatments possible for large lithic points. The basal concavity is one of them, independently invented not only in Clovis and in the Cantabro, Asturian, Solutrean, but also in other prehistoric traditions found in Russia. One or two technical attributes are insufficient to establish a cultural link or long-distance interconnection. While basal thinning has been used in various regions since Middle Paleolithic times, Fluting is apparently a peculiar, specific, and difficult to master technique for basal thinning that seemed to have been a genuinely Native American invention. Yeah, so the fluting, that channel that was napped into that, and that's napped into the middle of the projectile point there. Where is my video? So you'll see a channel, this flake that's been struck here, and here. You can see the channel here. That's a single flake that's been taken out. And it's usually the last thing that's done to the biface, and it's also the most difficult flake to pull off. And then this part so this is done on both sides, and then this part of the blade is like paper thin. So this is why I say, like, when you hear me talk about and gush about Clovis points, it's because they are some of the most well-made stone tools like ever devised by humans. They're such intricate pieces of art. They're extremely, extremely good. There is nothing like this form of basal thinning amongst the concave base Solutrean points made 9,000 to 5,000 years earlier. Remember, human occupations are usually given a date range, not necessarily a hard date. We're clever little primates and we deserve a treat. Yes. Credit should be given where credit is due. Native Americans, descended from diverse Asian populations, were the makers of Clovis and pre-Clovis lithics. The Solutrean of southwestern Europe is another story altogether. It seems to me particularly irresponsible, in the absence of any credible scientific evidence for prehistoric European settlement of the New World, for some professional archaeologists to be just suggesting that Native Americans were not the descendants of the first colonizers of this land. So this is the book. This is Dennis Stanford. This is the publisher of Solutrean Hypothesis.
What scientists and people think about the first Americans is that they were people who came from Asia. They came into Alaska, across the Bering Land Bridge during the last ice age. The earliest people were Clovis people, and they made a very distinctive type of...
We now know they're not the earliest people.
artifact we call a Clovis projectile point. And we presume that their ancestors would have made something very similar. Clovis people used a bifacial technology, which is an artifact that's flaked on both sides, like an arrowhead, but very distinctive with flutes on the bases. We find them from coast to coast here in North America and from southern Alberta clear down into Venezuela. So we expected to find them in Alaska and Siberia, but in all the work we did up there, we never found anything similar. In fact, the technology in Northeast Asia is one where they use tiny microblades that are inset into bone and ivory projectile points and knives. Totally different philosophy. We went to look at a site discovered near Cactus Hill, Virginia, and the site had a Clovis occupation, and it had another occupation below Clovis that dated maybe 4,000 years older than Clovis. And they had projectile points similar to Clovis, but they were not fluted. And I said, oh, this is what we're looking for. This is the ancestor of Clovis. We realized almost immediately we were looking in the wrong direction. And our ancestors to Clovis were here on the east coast of North America. And where did they come from? They certainly didn't come from Siberia. The Solutrean technology in southwestern Europe looks very similar to Cactus Hill. It is a bit older, but it's clear there's a technological
5,000 years
relationship.
older.
They're making their stone tools the same way. If there had been a crossing from Europe to North America, that would explain the evidence that we're finding at Cactus Hill and how it relates to the Solutrean. We know that boats have been known for at least 40 to maybe 60,000 years. And with the drop in sea level...
But as that paper pointed out, there's never been any evidence of oceanic hunting by Solutreans.
250 feet or so during the last ice age. And the fact that Europe was connected to North America by an ice bridge, basically. And people with boats could be hunting for sea mammals along that ice edge and do quite well. So what we've been doing is looking for more sites, and we're finding many sites in the Chesapeake region that are supporting that hypothesis. 20,000 years ago, the Chesapeake Bay didn't exist. It was the Susquehanna River, and the Susquehanna River drained across 50 miles of continental shelf before it emptied into the Ice Age Atlantic Ocean. Well, the biggest problem then is the fact that where the earliest people landed and started to live is now 250 feet underwater. And it's really difficult to find those sites. When dredging the continental shelf, occasionally some of these artifacts have been found. And in particular, one found right on the edge of the continental shelf was a mastodon skull. And mastodon remains, and associated with them was a very nice bifacial knife that's similar to the ones from Europe. And radiocarbon dating the mastodon skull gave us a date of 22,000, which is just about perfect for one, the sea level, and two, the timing of the people coming across the ice from Europe. There's a type of DNA known as mitochondrial DNA. And everybody in the world is in somehow or other related to the different types of mitochondrial DNA. North American Indians have about 4 major mitochondrial DNA lineages, known as A, B, C, and D. And then there's some minor input, one of which is X. And X doesn't occur in Eastern Asia. Where we see a lot of X is in North Africa, up through Spain, and even in Europe. What's really interesting is there's a difference between the mitochondrial X in North America and that of Europe. The X2 in North America is X2A, and X2A is a result of a mutation that took place in the last 20,000 years. So there's a slight difference between the two. It's beginning to look like Solutrean people came from North Africa into Europe, and 23,000 years ago moved into Eastern North America. And that's what the genetic data is telling us. Well, this discovery is really significant because it changes our whole view of the first Americans. It pushes it back 10,000 or more years before we thought people were even here. And it indicates that they're probably coming from multiple directions, first from Europe, and then much later, at the end of the Ice Age, from Siberia.
Well, like we said earlier, Giordano, we're not disputing what humans were capable of. We're disputing like what the evidence actually says. The carbon date is only associated with the mammoth. The bifacial tool that he found could have been washed into it at a different date. Because it was dredged up, it wasn't actually like, it wasn't actually like methodically excavated and then sampled. And I think the lack of evidence shows, this sort of disproves it, is that there was no evidence of oceanic hunting of marine life in the Solutrean peoples, and also the fact that they're 5,000 years apart is just I think that's too big of a gap. And plus, they weren't the first, as we know now.
professional archaeologist, and this channel is devoted to the archaeology of North America, especially in the region that we call the Eastern Woodlands. Now, a few days ago, some news broke that some human footprints were excavated in New Mexico, and they've been dated to between about 23,000 and 21,000 calibrated
So this is
radiocarbon
West
years
Coast.
before present.
It's on the west side
And that's some of the earliest evidence that
continent.
we've got for a human presence in the interior of the Americas. And these results were published in a journal called Science, which I found tends to publish somewhat sensationalized research. So I was optimistic but skeptical about the claims of this report. Now, before I get into the report itself, I want to point out that for a couple of decades, a lot of archaeologists have provided really strong evidence that we have sites on this continent that predate Clovis culture, and the opening of the ice-free corridor, which is traditionally how kids in school are taught that people moved from like Siberia to Alaska and into the interior of North America. And I've talked about that in the first two First Americans videos, which I've put links to down in the description. So whatever I might think about the quality of this particular report, I'm confident that people were in the Americas thousands of years before Clovis culture coalesced a little over 13,000 years ago. Now, first things first, the White Sands footprints were found on the north side of White Sands National Park in southern New Mexico, and there's several species represented in these footprints, like mammoths, but the prints that we're worried about here are the human ones, which are unequivocally human. No other animal on Earth has a footprint that looks like ours. So it's not like a coyote and a wolf, which you can mix those two up, or a cow and a bison or something like that. So 8 different geologic surfaces with human footprints were identified and assigned track horizon numbers, or TH numbers. And they are kind of these surfaces that
what I'm saying 5% is that because they look similar is why they're arguing, even though the dates are 5,000 years apart. We should see similar technology. We should see a transitional form between Solutrean and Clovis, and we just don't. That's one aspect of it. And what I'm saying is, like, they're like, yeah, Solutreans could have gotten on a boat and hunted marine life along the ice shelf across the Atlantic and ended up in North America. Even though culturally we know they never, like, we have no evidence that they ever did that.
have the footprints pressed into them, and they're kind of stacked on top of each other. The report lists them kind of backwards to how we would normally do it. TH1 is the deepest and the oldest, and TH8 is the highest and the most recent. Normally, we'd put 1 at the top and 8 at the bottom, because if we revisit the site, go deeper, and find that there are deeper horizons, then we have more numbers to go to. But it looks like the lead author is affiliated with the UK institution, and they do things the other way around, where the deepest and oldest is the lowest number, and the highest and most recent is the highest number. These footprints were pressed into wetland mud, and that's not really surprising to me, because I've heard several Southwestern specialists describe the environment of New Mexico as similar to modern-day Minnesota during at least parts of the Pleistocene, so a lot of swampy environment. Based on the sizes of the footprints, it looks like most of them were made by teenagers and kids, which is interesting. Now, the dates themselves come from radiocarbon assays of seeds from Rupia carihosa. These are a kind of a wetland grass. And these seeds were interbedded with the footprint layers. So you'd have a layer of footprints, and then you'd have a bunch of seeds on top of that. And then you'd have another layer or two of footprints, then you'd have more seeds, and so on and so on. The footprints themselves are a good indication that the context is pretty undisturbed. If a bunch of burrowing animals or tree root systems or whatever were dragging older seeds up into these positions, they'd destroy the footprints that were, the things that we're really interested in the first place. The footprints would have been obliterated. And even then, there's no reason that those kinds of disturbances would redeposit the seeds in a consistent order, with the oldest seeds at the bottom and the youngest seeds at the top. And we see that pattern pretty consistently throughout the column. There's also indication that the seeds were pressed into the footprint.
The reason they give that we don't have evidence of that is because they were hugging the coasts of the continents, which were 200 feet lower than they are today. When the glacial shelf melted, it flooded the oceans. So they say, all the evidence is underwater. It's the same with the Great Lakes here in Ontario. We speculate that there probably were a lot of there's probably a lot of paleo sites that are like in the lakes.
As people were walking around, so people stepping on the grasses and those seeds being embedded in the footprints.
This cheater using string.
Now there is
using
a process
string to mark
that
his
can
grid.
potentially skew these dated
I'm joking.
seeds to look
I'm
older
just
than they
talking
actually
shit.
are, and we call this the reservoir effect. So basically, some kinds of bedrock or water soluble.
We
so
have to
if there's a
expropriate
lake
all
or
the beach
swamp on top
property
of
with
that
capitalists.
rock, the very old geologic carbon is dissolving and getting into the water. So plants that grow in that water are then incorporating that old carbon supply that is already depleted in carbon-14. So a carbon date of those plant seeds will make them look older than they really are. I personally think it's really unlikely to see the reservoir effect skewing a bunch of Clovis period radiocarbon dates back 9,000 years older than they actually were. And I definitely don't see any reason that the seeds should cluster so tightly between 23,000 and 21,000 years ago, because environmental shifts are going to make those reservoir effects fluctuate in their intensity. So droughts concentrate the old carbon, which should increase the effect, and heavy rainfall dilutes the old carbon, so that alleviates the effect. Also, the reservoir effect is more closely associated with limestone geology, since limestone is high in soluble carbonates, like calcium carbonate, for instance. So, all in all, I find this report pretty compelling. It's difficult to argue that the context is disturbed when something as fragile as the footprints are being fossilized, and I can't think of an argument against the accuracy of the carbon dates that would push them anywhere near the Clovis dates. But I would like to see some sort of luminescence dating techniques used on some of these strata. So if I hear any solid arguments against the
Oh yeah, once we nationalize archaeology under democratic workers and indigenous control, oh my god, the science that'll come out of it will be amazing.
Quality of this report, I'll address those, but maybe in another video or something. But for now, everything looks to be pretty well in line with what most archaeologists have been saying for about the last decade or so. So as always, if there are any questions.
Anyway, I'm giving him shit for using string to mark his edges here when we don't really do that. It's a waste of time. We use flags to mark the corners instead of pins. I mean, some companies do use flags, but you'll see like my walls are fucking straight. I don't need no damn string. And I teach my field techs, my field technicians to dig a straight wall. Use a DeWalt laser. No, all you need is a shovel handle. It takes 2 shovels. You lay the one shovel down between the flags, and then you just chop along the edge. Easy. Bingo bongo. Bing bong. When you're digging up the long dead bones of the past, go with a name you trust. All you need is your hands. Man, I should get more field photos. This is actually from this year. The last field day, where the camera's not at an angle. The whole site was actually on a slope overlooking a ravine. This is a massive slope, and there's like a big drop off right after this this tarp here on the left. This must have been fun to lay in this grid. Because you're not just running a tape measure between stakes when you're laying a grid in. The stakes in 2 dimensions have to be 5 meters apart. So if your stake is here and your other stake is down here, they can't be 5 meters like this way. They gotta be 5 meters like across the top and then down. So you have to be able to take a plumb bob and at exactly 5 meters and a line level and put the whole grid in. And on a flat plow zone, usually not a big deal, but on a hill like this, massive pain in the ass. Anyway, so I was just coming to think about this lately is the nature of archaeology. And basically what happened over the last 30 to 40 years was the push to recover and rescue archaeology prior to development. It's a field known as CRM, or cultural resource management. Basically we do these rush digs at micro budgets in order to save the historical record, essentially. And what I've come to realize in my study of Marxism and archaeology is that what this created was a proletarianization of archaeology, right? Prior to, like, in the 60s and 70s, like this was an activity meant for the petty bourgeoisie, the intelligentsia, the university professors and students, right? It's not a worker's job doing archaeology. Now it is. Now we have private companies bidding on projects, and then they hire workers to come and do the actual physical work. They then produce a report given to the government, and then that report is used to clear the environmental requirements for development. And so this creates this turns it into a proletarian occupation. This turns it into a job. And what happens when, again, the pressures and the contradictions within capitalism is applied to archaeology? Bidding wars leads to downward pressure on wages. It incentivizes shitty work. And so you get all these the field of CRM, when it first was developed, was a hugely progressive step in the right direction towards increasing the amount of archaeology that's done. And then what it did was also a proletarianized archaeology. But then, when taken to its extreme, it also puts downward pressure on wages and incentivizes shitty work, which then pisses off, your indigenous people who are also participating in the dig with you. And so it's under these conditions which leads to workers organizing and ultimately unionizing, which is why I would argue, because Ontario has one of the most advanced CRM programs in North America, it is no coincidence that we were the first ones to unionize. Now that I really think about it, now that my training in Marxism applies to my own job. But then where do we go from here, right? We're unionized, but we're still under the pressures of capitalism. The only solution going forward, once the contradictions within capitalism play themselves out and the working class has no choice but to overthrow the entire system, I foresee us nationalizing archaeology, maybe under Parks Canada, under democratic workers and indigenous control. And that way we can provide funding, the correct amount of funding to do the jobs properly. Shitty archaeologists can be held to account, and full democratic control by the indigenous population will give them something that's never existed before, which is their full ownership over their own material history, right? We could, under the system, we could easily make accessible in neutral spaces these artifacts to be accessible by anyone within those First Nations. You could put them in a neutral space agreed upon by everybody, because in most places in Ontario you have overlapping traditional and treaty territories between different nations, and you're not gonna make everybody happy. So like just a neutral space, in my opinion, is the only way to go. My anthro professor's specialty in the field is natural disaster sites. The project she's running is a Roman city that was destroyed by an earthquake. That's super cool. I got to visit Herculaneum in Pompeii. And I got to climb Mount Vesuvius, speaking of natural disasters and archaeology. Yeah, I've been around the block. That's for sure. All right, well that just about covers everything that I wanted to cover tonight. I think I will call it here, folks. I might come back on later, but it's been a decently long week, and I kind of want to go bother my girlfriend right now. So I think I'll sign off, and I don't know. I might come back on a little bit later for gaming or something. Thanks everyone for popping by. Giordano and 5%. Really good to see you guys. I'm really glad you made it out tonight. Glad I was able to crash the party again. Yeah, no, it was good. It was really good to see you, and I'm glad you're doing well. And I'm excited for your schoolwork.